The bowl shattered against the stone floor before Elena Voss could catch it, and the kitchen fell silent except for the dripping of broth down the wall. "Worthless," snapped Priya Okafor, the head cook, snatching a rag from the counter and throwing it at Elena's chest. "The Alpha King arrives within the hour, and you cannot even hold a bowl steady. Clean this before anyone sees." Elena dropped to her knees and began wiping the floor, her hands trembling, though not from fear of Priya. She had long stopped fearing scoldings. What made her hands shake was the low murmur rolling through the pack house, a murmur that had been building since dawn. Ashfall Pack rarely welcomed important visitors, but today was different. Today, Cade Thornwood, the Alpha King who ruled over every pack from the northern pines to the southern coast, was coming to conduct the Alliance Summit himself. Elena had heard whispers about him her whole life. They said his wolf was the largest ever recorded, a creature of near mythical size and silver-black fur. They said he had not chosen a mate in 12 years of ruling, and that no wolf, however powerful, dared question why. Elena had no reason to think any of that concerned her. She was the lowest-ranked wolf in Ashfall, a woman whose own wolf had never fully shown itself, a source of constant shame to her family, and an easy target for anyone looking to feel superior. "Faster," Priya barked, and Elena scrubbed harder, ignoring the sting of hot broth against her knuckles. Outside the kitchen, the pack house had become a hive of urgent movement. Servants polished the long oak table in the great hall. Guards adjusted their uniforms for the third time. Pack members who had ignored Elena for years suddenly walked past her with straighter spines and prouder faces, eager to be noticed by anyone of importance, though certainly not by her. Her older sister, Nora Voss, appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a deep green dress that had clearly taken hours to prepare. She glanced at Elena kneeling on the floor and wrinkled her nose as though she had stepped in something unpleasant. "Do try not to embarrass the family today," Nora said. "Stay in the kitchen. Stay out of sight. It would be humiliating enough if the Alpha King learned we were related to someone like you." Elena said nothing. She had learned years ago that arguing only extended the conversation, and she wanted nothing more than for these conversations to end quickly. She finished scrubbing the floor, gathered the broken pieces of the bowl into her apron, and rose to her feet just as the great bell above the pack house began to ring. The bell meant only one thing: the Alpha King had arrived. Every wolf in the building surged toward the windows and doorways, desperate for a glimpse of the man whose name carried weight across the entire Western Territory. Elena remained in the kitchen, exactly as she had been told, though curiosity pulled at her despite herself. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved quietly toward the small window above the wash basin, the only one in the kitchen that faced the courtyard. Through the glass, she saw him. Cade Thornwood moved like a man who had never once doubted his place in the world. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than any wolf Elena had ever seen, his dark hair cut short and practical. He wore no crown, no elaborate cloak, nothing to announce his rank beyond the sheer authority radiating from his presence. Guards flanked him on either side, though he seemed to need no protection at all. His eyes swept across the courtyard, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. Elena felt something strange stir in her chest as she watched him, a sensation she could not name and did not trust. She told herself it was simply nerves, the same nervous energy affecting everyone in the pack house today, and she stepped back from the window before anyone could catch her staring. "There you are," Priya said, appearing behind her with a stack of serving trays. "Take these to the side entrance. The kitchen staff will serve refreshments once the summit begins, but you are not to enter the Great Hall. Do you understand? Not for any reason." "I understand," Elena said quietly. She carried the trays through the narrow servants' corridor that wound along the back of the pack house, a path built specifically to keep lower-ranked wolves separate from important gatherings. The corridor was dim and cramped, lined with old stone that had absorbed the smell of 100 years of cooking. Elena had walked it more times than she could count, and she moved through it now on instinct, her mind wandering despite the weight of the trays in her arms. She thought about the strange flutter she had felt watching Cade Thornwood through the window. It embarrassed her, though she could not say exactly why. Perhaps it was simply that everyone in the pack house seemed captivated by him, and she had absorbed that same fascination without meaning to. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something she did not have the language to explain. The corridor ended at a side door that opened into a small courtyard used for deliveries. Elena set the trays down on a stone bench and allowed herself a rare moment to breathe the fresh air. The courtyard was empty, quiet, a small pocket of calm in a house otherwise consumed by anxious energy. She did not expect the door across the courtyard to open. Two guards stepped out first, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. Then Cade Thornwood emerged behind them, apparently seeking a moment away from the crowded entrance hall before the summit officially began. Elena froze, uncertain whether to retreat back into the corridor or remain still and hope she went unnoticed. She chose stillness, pressing herself slightly against the stone wall, though there was nowhere truly to hide in the small space. Cade's gaze swept across the courtyard the way it had swept across the crowd earlier, quick and thorough. Then it stopped. It stopped on her. Elena felt the air shift the moment his eyes met hers. It was not merely the discomfort of being noticed by someone powerful. It was something deeper, something that seemed to reach beneath her skin and settle into her bones. She saw his expression change, the composed authority in his face cracking for just a moment into something raw and startled. He took a step toward her. "Your name," he said. His voice was low, controlled, though there was an edge beneath it that had not been there moments before. "Elena," she managed. "Elena Voss." The guards exchanged a glance, clearly noticing the shift in their king's demeanor, though neither dared speak. Cade closed the remaining distance between them slowly, as though testing whether the strange pull he felt was real or imagined. Elena remained pressed against the wall, unable to move, unable to look away from his eyes, which had darkened to a shade closer to gold than brown. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly. She did not know how to answer honestly. The sensation in her chest had grown stronger, a pulling warmth that made no sense given the circumstances. She had heard stories of the mating bond her entire life, stories told by wolves who had found their true partners, but she had never expected such a thing to apply to her. She was the reject, the wolf without a full shift, the woman her own family was ashamed of. Surely whatever was happening was a mistake. "I don't understand," she whispered. Before Cade could respond, the side door swung open again, and Priya stepped into the courtyard, likely searching for the trays Elena had left behind. She stopped abruptly at the sight before her mouth falling open as she registered the Alpha King standing inches from the lowest-ranked wolf in the pack. "My apologies," Priya stammered, bowing quickly. "I did not realize anyone was out here. Elena, come inside at once. You should not be bothering His Majesty." "She is not bothering me," Cade said, his voice sharpening with an authority that made Priya flinch. "In fact, I would like her to remain exactly where she is." Priya's confusion deepened, but she did not dare argue with the Alpha King. She retreated a step, glancing uncertainly between Elena and Cade as though trying to make sense of a scene that defied every assumption she held about the young woman she had scolded only an hour earlier. Cade turned his attention back to Elena, his expression softening slightly, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "This is not something either of us can ignore," he said. "Whatever this connection is, I intend to understand it fully, before the day ends." Elena's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat into the familiar safety of being overlooked, of being the wolf no one paid attention to. But another part of her, a part she barely recognized, felt something unlocking deep inside her chest, something that had been dormant for as long as she could remember. "The summit will begin shortly," one of the guards said carefully, clearly reluctant to interrupt but equally aware of the schedule awaiting them. Cade did not look away from Elena immediately. When he finally did, it was with visible effort, as though tearing his attention from her required more willpower than commanding an entire territory. "This conversation is not finished," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "I will find you again before the day is through." He turned and walked back toward the entrance hall, his guards falling into step behind him, though one of them glanced back at Elena with an expression somewhere between confusion and curiosity. Elena remained rooted to the spot long after they disappeared inside, her mind racing through possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. She thought of every cruel word spoken about her over the years, every reminder that she was less than the wolves around her, every assumption that her worth had already been decided and would never change. And yet the Alpha King of the entire Western Territory had looked at her as though she were the most significant person in the room. Priya finally broke the silence, her voice hesitant. "Elena, what happened out here?" "I don't know," Elena admitted honestly. "But I don't think today is going to end the way either of us expected." She gathered the trays from the stone bench, her hands steadier now than they had been all morning, and carried them back into the pack house, unaware that the true turning point of her life had only just begun. Inside, the corridor felt different somehow, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the strange charge from the courtyard. Elena walked slowly, replaying the moment again and again, trying to convince herself that she had misunderstood what happened. Perhaps the Alpha King had simply been curious about an unfamiliar face. Perhaps the odd warmth she felt was nothing more than nerves brought on by standing so close to someone of his rank. She wanted an explanation that did not require her to believe something impossible. But deep beneath her ribs, something continued to hum, steady and undeniable, refusing to let her dismiss what she had felt. When she reached the kitchen, Priya was already speaking in hushed tones with two other members of the staff, their eyes flicking toward Elena the moment she entered. The conversation stopped abruptly. "What?" Elena asked, setting the trays down. "Nothing," Priya said quickly, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Finish preparing the refreshments. The summit begins in 10 minutes. Elena returned to her duties, grateful for the distraction of familiar work. She arranged pastries on silver platters, poured pitchers of water, and avoided the curious glances now following her around the kitchen. Word of what had happened in the courtyard had clearly begun to spread, though no one seemed to know quite what to make of it. Her sister Nora appeared again, this time with a sharper edge to her expression. "I heard something ridiculous," she said, crossing her arms. "Someone said the Alpha King spoke to you outside. Please tell me that isn't true." "It's true," Elena said simply, not bothering to soften the answer. Nora's face shifted through several emotions in quick succession, disbelief giving way to irritation, irritation giving way to something that looked almost like fear. "Why would he speak to you? What did you say to him?" "I didn't say anything," Elena replied. "He asked my name." "That's absurd," Nora snapped, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "He has no reason to know your name, unless you did something foolish to attract his attention." Elena did not respond. She had learned long ago that explaining herself to Nora rarely changed anything, and today she had far more pressing matters occupying her thoughts than her sister's disapproval. Nora huffed and stormed off toward the great hall, likely eager to secure a good position among the crowd gathering to observe the summit. The refreshments were carried out shortly after, and Elena found herself assigned to the outer edge of the hall, close enough to see the proceedings but far enough to remain unnoticed by the important guests seated at the long table. She kept her eyes low as she moved between groups, refilling cups and offering trays, though she could not stop herself from glancing occasionally toward the head of the table, where Cade Thornwood now sat with an air of composed authority that gave no hint of the moment they had shared only minutes earlier. Yet she noticed something subtle. Every so often his gaze would drift from the pack leader speaking before him and settle briefly on her, quick and searching, before returning to the discussion as though nothing had happened. No one else seemed to notice, too absorbed in the importance of the summit to pay attention to a serving girl along the wall. Elena's heart continued its unfamiliar rhythm, caught somewhere between fear and a fragile, unfamiliar hope. She did not know what the rest of the day would bring, but she understood with unshakable certainty that her life, quiet and overlooked for as long as she could remember, had just shifted onto a path she never could have predicted. As the summit progressed, discussions of territory boundaries and trade agreements filled the hall, voices rising and falling in tones of practiced diplomacy. Elena moved through her duties mechanically, her attention split between her tasks and the persistent awareness of Cade's presence at the head of the table. She told herself repeatedly that whatever had passed between them in the courtyard would fade, that by evening he would return to his own territory, and she would return to the familiar rhythm of being overlooked. But every time their eyes met across the crowded hall, that certainty grew weaker, replaced by a quiet, insistent question she could not silence. What if nothing about today would ever be ordinary again? The summit stretched into the late afternoon, and Elena's feet ached from hours of standing along the wall, refilling cups and clearing plates while pack leaders debated territory lines she barely understood. Still, her mind kept drifting back to the courtyard, to the look in Cade Thornwood's eyes when he first saw her, to the promise he had made before returning inside. This conversation is not finished. She did not know whether to hope he meant it, or fear what it would mean if he did. When the summit finally adjourned, the great hall erupted into a flurry of movement, as pack leaders rose from their seats, gathering their advisors and preparing for the evening feast that traditionally followed such gatherings. Elena moved quickly to clear the head table, hoping to finish her duties and slip away before anyone noticed her lingering too long near the Alpha King's seat. She was not quick enough. "Leave the tray," Cade said, his voice low but carrying an authority that made the surrounding servants freeze mid-motion. "I would like a moment." Elena's hands stilled over a stack of empty plates. Around her, several pack leaders exchanged glances, clearly noting the unusual request, but wise enough not to comment. Priya, standing near the kitchen door, looked as though she might faint. "Your Majesty," Elena said carefully, straightening. "I have duties to attend to." "Your duties can wait," Cade replied, though not unkindly. He rose from his seat, and the remaining stragglers in the hall quickly found reasons to excuse themselves. sensing that whatever was about to happen required privacy. Once the hall had emptied save for 2 guards stationed near the entrance, Cade studied her for a long moment, as though trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. "You felt it too," he said. "In the courtyard. Do not tell me you did not." Elena considered denying it, considered retreating into the safety of pretending nothing unusual had occurred. But something about the directness in his gaze made lying feel impossible. "I felt something," she admitted. "I don't understand what it was." "It is called a mating pull," Cade said. "My wolf recognized yours the moment I saw you. I have felt nothing like it in 12 years of searching, and I confess I had begun to believe it would never happen." Elena's breath caught. She had heard stories of the mating pull her entire life, tales told with reverence by wolves fortunate enough to experience it, but she had never imagined such a thing applying to her. She was the wolf whose own shift remained incomplete, the woman her family considered an embarrassment. Surely fate would not choose someone like her for the most powerful alpha in the territory. "There must be a mistake," she said quietly. I am not someone worthy of that kind of bond." Something flickered across Cade's face, something that looked almost like anger, though she quickly realized it was not directed at her. "Who told you that you are not worthy?" he asked, his voice sharpening. Elena hesitated, unwilling to air years of quiet humiliation to a stranger, even one who claimed some mysterious connection to her. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It's simply true. My wolf has never fully shown itself. I am the lowest-ranked member of this pack. There are wolves far more suited to stand beside someone like you." "My wolf does not choose based on rank," Cade said firmly. "It chooses based on something far deeper than status or strength. If it has chosen you, then you are exactly who it is meant to be, regardless of what anyone else has told you." Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words settle into the wounds she had carried for years, but doubt clung stubbornly to her chest. "Even if that's true," she said, "the pack will never accept it. They already think I am worthless. If you claim me, they will assume you have made an error, or worse, that I have somehow tricked you." "No one will think anything of the sort," Cade said, "because I intend to make my intentions known publicly, in a way that leaves no room for doubt." Elena's stomach dropped. "Publicly? Tonight?" "At the feast," Cade confirmed. "Every pack leader in the Western Territory will be present. It is the appropriate setting to formally acknowledge a claim of this significance." "You cannot be serious," Elena said, panic rising in her voice despite her attempt to remain composed. "I am not prepared for that kind of attention. My family will be humiliated. The other packs will think you have lost your senses. They will think nothing of the sort once they understand the truth," Cade said, his tone gentler now, though no less resolute. "I know this is overwhelming. I do not ask you to fully understand it tonight. I only ask that you trust the certainty my wolf feels, even if you cannot yet feel that same certainty yourself." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found none. His expression remained steady, sincere, entirely unlike the arrogance she had expected from someone of his rank and reputation. Still, the thought of standing before the entire gathered pack while the Alpha King made some kind of public declaration filled her with a dread she could not shake. "What exactly do you intend to do?" she asked cautiously. "I intend to mark you as my mate," Cade said simply. "Before everyone. There will be no question left unanswered, no room for the pack to dismiss what has happened between us." Elena's mind raced through the implications. A mark was permanent, a bond recognized by every pack across the territory, an announcement that could never be quietly undone. Once marked, she would no longer be the invisible reject scrubbing floors in the kitchen. She would be the mate of the most powerful alpha in the Western lands, a position that would draw scrutiny from every direction. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until the feast begins," Cade replied. "I will not force this upon you against your wishes. But know that my wolf will not easily accept delay for much longer. The pull only grows stronger the longer we remain apart." He stepped closer, and Elena felt that same warm current pass through her chest, undeniable and impossible to ignore. Whatever this bond was, it clearly was not something either of them could simply reason away. "Elena," he said quietly, using her name for the first time since the courtyard, "I know this pack has treated you unfairly. I do not yet know the full extent of it, but I intend to find out. And I promise you this, whatever has happened to you here will never happen again, not while you stand beside me." The sincerity in his voice threatened to undo the careful composure she had built over years of enduring cruelty without complaint. She turned away before he could see the emotion rising in her eyes, unwilling to appear weak in front of someone who had already seen far too much of her vulnerability in a single afternoon. I should return to the kitchen, she said. Priya will need help preparing for the feast. Cade did not stop her as she walked toward the servants' corridor, though she could feel his gaze following her the entire way. When she finally slipped through the door and out of sight, she leaned against the cool stone wall, her heart pounding, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of fear, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The kitchen was in full preparation mode when she entered, staff rushing between counters as they assembled dishes for the evening feast. Priya spotted her immediately and pulled her aside, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained curiosity. What happened in there? Priya whispered. Everyone saw him clear the hall just to speak with you. Elena, what is going on? Elena hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. She trusted Priya more than most in the pack, but the truth felt too enormous, too fragile to share before she had even fully accepted it herself. I don't know yet, Elena said honestly, but I think everything is about to change. Priya studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though sensing the weight behind Elena's words without needing further explanation. Whatever happens tonight, she said quietly, I want you to know that I never believed the things they said about you. I simply never had the courage to say so. Elena felt a lump rise in her throat at the unexpected kindness, a small crack in the isolation she had endured for so long. Thank you, she said softly. The remaining hours passed in a blur of preparation, the kitchen staff working furiously to ready the feast while Elena moved through her duties with a growing sense of unreality. Every so often she caught sight of her reflection in a polished tray or window, and each time she found herself wondering who exactly would be standing before the gathered packs tonight. Would she still be the invisible reject everyone had always seen, or would something else entirely step forward once the Alpha King made his intentions known? As the sun began to sink toward the horizon and the great hall filled with the sounds of gathering pack leaders, Elena stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway, watching the crowd assemble, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and a fragile, unfamiliar courage. Whatever happened next, she understood there would be no return to the quiet, overlooked life she had known. Before she could steady her nerves further, her mother, Clara Voss, appeared beside her, pulling her by the arm into a shadowed corner away from the bustling kitchen staff. Clara's expression was tight with worry, though whether the worry was for Elena or for the family's reputation, Elena could not immediately tell. Tell me what is happening, Clara demanded quietly. Nora says the Alpha King spoke with you twice today. Servants are whispering that he cleared the entire hall simply to speak with you alone. Elena, if you have done something to embarrass this family in front of every pack leader in the Western Territory, I need to know now. I haven't done anything, Elena said, struggling to keep her voice steady. He says his wolf recognized something in me, a mating pull. Clara's face drained of color. That is not possible, she said, though her voice wavered with uncertainty rather than conviction. The mating pull does not choose wolves who cannot even complete a full shift. There must be some mistake. That is what I told him, Elena said. He disagreed. Clara studied her daughter for a long moment, searching her face as though hoping to find evidence of some elaborate deception that would explain away the impossible. Finding none, she sighed heavily and rubbed her temples. If this is true, and I stress if, then everything changes. Do you understand that? You cannot simply return to the kitchen after tonight. You cannot continue being treated the way you have been treated. I know, Elena said quietly. Your father will need to be told immediately, Clara continued, already thinking several steps ahead in a way that felt more calculating than comforting. The family will need to prepare a statement. We cannot appear as though we were hiding something valuable, simply because we failed to recognize it ourselves. Elena felt a familiar bitterness rise in her chest. Even now, faced with the possibility that her life was about to transform entirely, her mother's first instinct was to consider how the family's reputation might benefit, rather than how Elena herself might be feeling in the midst of such an overwhelming turn of events. Mother, Elena said carefully, regardless of what happens tonight, I want you to understand something. I remember every time this family treated me as an embarrassment. I remember every gathering where I was told to remain hidden, every conversation where my worth was measured only by my failures. If tonight changes anything, it will not erase those memories. Clara's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, though it vanished quickly beneath her usual composed exterior. We did what we believed was necessary, she said. Appearances matter in this pack, Elena. You understand that better than anyone, given how harshly you have been judged for so long. I understand it, Elena said, but I no longer accept it as an excuse. Before Clara could respond, the sound of the great hall doors opening echoed down the corridor, signaling that guests had begun arriving for the feast. Clara straightened immediately, smoothing her dress and adopting the composed expression she reserved for important occasions. "We will discuss this further later," she said. "For now, focus on surviving whatever is about to happen tonight." She disappeared toward the hall, leaving Elena alone in the shadowed corner, her heart still pounding from the conversation. She took a moment to breathe, steadying herself before returning to her duties, though the weight of everything Clara had said lingered heavily in her mind. Priya found her a few minutes later, carrying a fresh apron and a look of quiet determination. "You do not have to go back out there if you are not ready," she said. "I can tell the others you are unwell." "No," Elena said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "I need to face this directly. Hiding has never protected me from anything. Perhaps it is time I stopped hiding altogether." Priya smiled faintly, a rare expression of genuine warmth. "Then let us get you ready," she said. "Whatever happens tonight, you should not face it looking as though you just spent the entire day scrubbing floors." For the first time since the courtyard, Elena allowed herself a small, uncertain smile. Priya helped her tidy her appearance as best they could within the limited time available, smoothing her hair and straightening her simple servant's uniform, since there had been no opportunity to prepare anything more suitable for the evening ahead. As the sound of the gathering crowd grew louder beyond the kitchen walls, Elena felt the strange warmth in her chest intensify, as though her body already sensed the presence of the man waiting somewhere in that crowded hall. She did not know what would happen once she stepped through those doors, whether the pack would accept what Cade intended to declare, or whether the entire evening would collapse into chaos and humiliation. But she understood, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would not face it as the invisible reject she had always been. Something inside her had already begun to shift, quietly but unmistakably, and she suspected that whatever emerged from tonight's feast would be a version of herself the pack had never before been forced to acknowledge. The great hall blazed with light from 100 candles, and the long tables groaned under platters of roasted meat, fresh bread, and wine brought from every corner of the Western Territory. Pack leaders and their families filled the room, their voices rising in the easy chatter that always followed a successful summit. Elena stood near the kitchen entrance, a tray balanced carefully in her hands, watching the crowd with a growing knot of tension in her stomach. She spotted Cade immediately. He stood near the head table, engaged in quiet conversation with an older man Elena recognized as Owen Whitfield, the beta of a neighboring pack. Cade's posture remained composed, but every so often his gaze drifted across the room, searching, until it found her near the kitchen doorway. Each time their eyes met, that same warm pull tugged at her chest, impossible to ignore no matter how she tried. Nora appeared at her side, her expression tight with barely restrained anxiety. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Mother said something about a mating pull. Elena, if this is some kind of trick, you need to end it now before it destroys this family's reputation entirely." "It isn't a trick," Elena said quietly. "I wish it were something I could control, but I can't." Nora's jaw tightened, though for once she did not respond with cruelty. Instead, she simply stared at Elena, as though seeing her for the first time, uncertain how to reconcile the sister she had spent years dismissing, with the possibility that she might soon stand beside the most powerful alpha in the territory. The feast continued for nearly an hour before Cade rose from his seat, and the entire hall gradually fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to occur. Servants paused mid-motion. Conversations trailed off. Every eye in the room turned toward the head table, where the Alpha King now stood with an expression of calm, unshakable resolve. "Before this gathering concludes," Cade began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed hall, "there is a matter I must address, one that concerns every pack represented here tonight." Elena's grip tightened on the tray she still held, her heart pounding so violently she feared everyone in the room might hear it. "For 12 years, Cade continued, "I have led this territory without a mate, despite the expectations placed upon me by every pack under my protection. I had begun to accept that perhaps such a bond was not meant for me. Today, I learned otherwise." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, curious glances exchanged between pack leaders unfamiliar with the significance of what was unfolding. Elena felt Nora stiffen beside her, and across the room, she caught sight of her mother's face, pale and rigid with anticipation. "Earlier today," Cade said, "my wolf recognized its true mate within the boundaries of Ashfall Pack. This recognition was immediate, unmistakable, and entirely without doubt." He stepped away from the head table and began walking toward the kitchen entrance where Elena stood frozen, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. Every head in the hall turned to follow his path, confusion evident on nearly every face as they struggled to understand what connection the powerful Alpha King could possibly have with a servant standing near the kitchen doorway. "No," Elena heard someone whisper. though she could not identify the voice through the roaring in her ears. Cade stopped before her, and for a moment the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. He reached out and gently took the tray from her trembling hands, setting it aside on a nearby table without breaking eye contact with her. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice steady enough for the entire hall to hear, "is my true mate." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of someone dropping a fork against a ceramic plate. Then the whispers began, spreading rapidly through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. "That cannot be correct," someone called out from near the back of the hall. Elena recognized the voice as belonging to Felix Ashworth, a wolf who had never bothered hiding his contempt for her over the years. "She is the lowest-ranked wolf in this pack. Her own shift remains incomplete. Surely there has been some error." "There is no error," Cade said, his tone sharpening with an authority that silenced the murmuring instantly. "My wolf does not make mistakes of this nature. I understand this comes as a surprise to many of you, given how this pack has apparently treated her. That will change immediately." Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, some curious, some doubtful, some openly hostile. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the familiar safety of being overlooked, but Cade's steady presence beside her made retreat impossible. "I intend to mark her tonight," Cade continued, addressing the entire hall, "so that no one present will question the legitimacy of this bond going forward. I ask that everyone here bear witness." A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, though none dared voice open objection given the authority radiating from the Alpha King's stance. Elena turned to look at him, searching his eyes for any hesitation, any sign that this decision was born from anything other than genuine certainty. "Are you certain?" she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "More certain than I have been about anything in my life," he replied, equally soft. "Do you trust me enough to allow this?" Elena thought of every humiliation she had endured within these walls, every whispered insult, every reminder that she would never be enough. She thought of the strange, undeniable warmth that had settled in her chest since the moment their eyes first met in the courtyard, and she thought of the quiet courage Priya had helped her find only hours earlier, the decision to stop hiding from whatever life intended to bring her. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Cade's expression softened with something close to relief, though the intensity in his gaze did not diminish. He gently brushed her hair aside, exposing the curve of her neck, and the entire hall seemed to lean forward collectively, every eye fixed on the moment about to unfold. "This will bond us permanently," he said quietly, giving her one final chance to reconsider. "Once marked, there is no undoing this connection." "I understand," Elena said. He leaned down, and the world around Elena seemed to fade into a blur of candlelight and hushed silence. The mark itself lasted only a moment, a sharp instant of sensation quickly replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire body, settling deep into her bones like something finally finding its rightful place after years of restless searching. When Cade straightened, his eyes had shifted entirely to gold, his wolf clearly close to the surface, though he maintained enough control to remain in his human form. He turned to address the stunned hall, one arm protectively positioned near Elena's shoulder. "Let it be known throughout every pack in this territory," he announced, "that Elena Voss is my mate, recognized and marked before witnesses from across the Western lands. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me directly, and will be treated accordingly." The hall remained frozen for several long seconds before Owen Whitfield, the beta who had been speaking with Cade earlier, stepped forward and offered a respectful bow. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to break the tension gripping the room. "This is a historic moment for the entire territory." Slowly, reluctantly, other pack leaders began offering similar gestures of acknowledgement, though Elena could see the confusion and skepticism still evident on many faces. Her own family remained near the back of the hall, her mother pale and rigid, her sister staring with an expression Elena could not fully interpret. Felix Ashworth, however, did not bow. He remained standing near the back wall, arms crossed, his expression twisted with obvious displeasure. "This is absurd," he muttered, though quietly enough that only those nearby could hear him clearly. Cade's attention snapped toward him immediately, his gaze hardening. "Do you have something to say, Felix?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby wolves take an involuntary step backward. Felix hesitated, clearly recognizing the danger of continuing to voice his objection openly before the Alpha King. "No, Your Majesty," he said stiffly. "Only my congratulations." Cade held his gaze a moment longer, a silent warning passing between them, before turning his attention back to the hall at large. "The feast will continue," he announced, Let this evening be remembered as the beginning of a new chapter, not only for myself, but for this entire pack. Slowly, hesitantly, conversation began to resume throughout the hall, though the atmosphere remained charged with an undercurrent of shock and uncertainty. Elena stood beside Cade, acutely aware of the mark now permanently etched into her skin, the physical proof of a bond she was only beginning to understand. "You did well," Cade murmured to her quietly, his hand finding hers beneath the edge of the table nearby. "I know this was not easy." "I don't think easy is a word that will describe much of what comes next," Elena replied, managing a small, uncertain smile despite the chaos still swirling around her. Cade's expression softened, something like genuine warmth breaking through his composed authority for the first time since the summit began. "No," he agreed, "but I intend to make certain that whatever comes next, you never face it alone again." Across the hall, Elena caught sight of her mother finally moving forward, her expression carefully arranged into something resembling pride, though Elena recognized the calculation still lurking beneath the surface. She braced herself for whatever conversation awaited, understanding with complete clarity that the quiet, invisible life she had known within these walls had ended the moment Cade Thornwood marked her before the entire assembled pack. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them as the wolf everyone had once called worthless. Clara reached them a moment later, her composed smile firmly in place, though Elena noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she offered a graceful curtsy toward Cade. "Your Majesty," she said smoothly, "this is truly an unexpected honor for our family. We had no idea our Elena possessed such remarkable qualities." Elena felt a flash of bitter irony at her mother's sudden praise, given the years spent dismissing those same qualities as non-existent. Cade seemed to sense the tension beneath Clara's polished words as well, his expression cooling slightly. "Interesting," he said evenly, "that you speak of remarkable qualities now, when I understand Elena spent this very afternoon scrubbing floors in your kitchen while wearing a stained apron." Clara's smile faltered. "Every member of this pack contributes according to their abilities," she said carefully. "We simply believed Elena's talents were better suited to domestic duties. Her talents were apparently suited to capturing the attention of the entire Western Territory's Alpha King," Cade replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I would suggest reconsidering how this family has assessed her abilities until now." Nora, standing slightly behind their mother, opened her mouth as though to add something, then apparently thought better of it under the weight of Cade's steady gaze. Clara recovered quickly, offering another shallow curtsy. "Of course, Your Majesty. We look forward to celebrating this union properly, once the appropriate arrangements can be made." "There will be time for arrangements," Cade said, "though I intend for Elena to remain close to me for the immediate future, given the significance of what has occurred tonight." Clara nodded stiffly and retreated with Nora toward the far side of the hall, leaving Elena alone with Cade once more, amid the slowly resuming chatter of the feast. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, the tension of the encounter finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Cade asked. "For not letting them pretend nothing happened," Elena said. "For not letting them rewrite the last several years as though I was always treated fairly." Cade's expression softened, and he reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her. "Whatever this family or this pack has done to you, it ends tonight. You are no longer someone whose worth can be dismissed by anyone's convenience." Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of the arrogance she had expected from someone of his rank, but found only quiet sincerity. The warmth in her chest, the strange pull that had first appeared in the courtyard, now settled into something steadier, something that felt less like confusion, and more like the beginning of trust. Across the hall, however, Felix Ashworth remained near the back wall, his expression tight with barely concealed resentment as he watched the two of them together. Elena caught his gaze for only a moment before he turned away, but the coldness in his eyes left an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach, a quiet warning that not everyone in the hall would accept tonight's events as easily as the pack leaders offering their careful diplomatic congratulations. She pushed the feeling aside for now, choosing instead to focus on the steady presence of the man beside her, the man whose wolf had somehow recognized something valuable in her when no one else ever had. Whatever difficulties awaited her in the days ahead, she understood that she would not face them the way she once had, isolated and unseen. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena Voss did not feel worthless at all. As the feast wound down and guests began departing into the cool night air, Elena remained at Cade's side, watching the hall empty in slow, murmuring waves. Guards began extinguishing the candles along the far walls, and servants moved quietly to clear the long tables, though several cast lingering glances toward her, uncertain how to reconcile the woman they had known for years with the mate now standing beside their most powerful ally. Elena met each glance steadily, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of their curiosity as she once might have done. Whatever tomorrow brought, she intended to meet it standing tall, no longer hidden away in the shadows of a family and a pack that had spent years teaching her to expect nothing more. Morning light spilled through the narrow window of the small guest chamber Elena had been given for the night, and for a moment she lay still, uncertain whether the events of the previous evening had truly happened or existed only within an elaborate dream. Then her fingers brushed against the mark at her neck, still tender to the touch, and the memory of Cade Thornwood standing before the entire pack came rushing back with undeniable clarity. She sat up slowly, taking in the unfamiliar room around her. It was far more comfortable than the cramped servants' quarters she had occupied for years, furnished with a proper bed, a wash basin of polished copper, and curtains that actually blocked the morning chill rather than merely gesturing toward the effort. Someone, likely under Cade's instruction, had arranged for her to sleep here rather than returning to the crowded room she shared with 3 other servants. A soft knock sounded at the door before Priya slipped inside, carrying a tray of tea and fresh bread. "I thought you might need this," Priya said, setting the tray down carefully. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Uncertain," Elena admitted. "Everything happened so quickly last night. I keep waiting to wake up and discover it was all imagined." "It was not imagined," Priya said, settling onto the edge of the bed. "The entire pack is speaking of nothing else. Some are calling it a miracle. Others are calling it an outrage. I imagine you will need to prepare yourself for both reactions in equal measure." Elena accepted the cup of tea gratefully, letting the warmth settle her nerves before responding. "What are people saying exactly?" Priya hesitated, clearly weighing how much honesty Elena could handle so early in the morning. "Some believe the Alpha King has made an error in judgment, that perhaps grief or exhaustion clouded his senses. Others believe you must possess some hidden strength the pack failed to recognize, given that mating pools are said to be infallible. And a few," she added carefully, "believe you somehow manipulated him, though I cannot imagine how such a rumor gained traction, given how little you have ever spoken to anyone of importance." Elena sighed, unsurprised by the accusation despite its absurdity. "Of course they think that," she said. "It is easier to believe I tricked him than to believe I might genuinely be worthy of this bond." "Give them time," Priya said gently. "People rarely adjust their opinions quickly, especially when those opinions have been reinforced for years. But the truth has a way of eventually becoming undeniable, regardless of how stubbornly people cling to old assumptions." A second knock interrupted their conversation, this one firmer, followed immediately by the door opening to reveal Cade himself, dressed simply though still carrying the unmistakable authority that seemed to follow him everywhere. Priya rose quickly, offering a respectful bow before excusing herself from the room. "I trust you slept adequately," Cade said, studying Elena carefully, as though searching for any sign of distress. "Adequately," Elena replied honestly, "though I confess my mind has not stopped racing since last night." Cade nodded, settling into the chair near the small writing desk across from her bed. "I imagine there is a great deal to process. I wanted to speak with you this morning before the day's obligations begin, to ensure you understand what comes next." "What does come next?" Elena asked. "Formally," Cade said, "you are now recognized as my mate throughout every pack in the Western Territory. This carries certain expectations, certain protections, and unfortunately, certain challenges as well. Not everyone will accept this bond gracefully, particularly those who have long assumed I would eventually choose a mate from among the more established pack lineages." Elena thought of Felix Ashworth's cold expression the previous night, the barely concealed resentment simmering beneath his forced politeness. "Someone already objected," she said. "Felix Ashworth. He seemed unwilling to accept it, even after your announcement." Cade's jaw tightened at the name. "Felix Ashworth has ambitions that extend beyond his current rank within this pack," he said. "I am not surprised he would resist any development that disrupts his plans, though I intend to ensure he understands the consequences of voicing that resistance too openly." "He is not the only one who doubts this," Elena said quietly. "My own family struggles to accept it. I imagine much of the pack shares similar doubts." "Doubt is natural," Cade said, "given how suddenly this occurred, but doubt does not change the truth of the bond itself, and I do not intend to allow doubt to dictate how you are treated going forward." Elena appreciated his conviction, though a quieter, more persistent worry lingered beneath the surface of her thoughts. "What if the bond fades?" she asked. "What if this was simply an overwhelming moment, and in time, you realize you made a mistake?" Cade's expression shifted, something between surprise and quiet frustration crossing his features. "The mating pull does not fade, Elena. It does not weaken with time or familiarity. If anything, it strengthens the longer two mates remain together. I understand your uncertainty, given everything you have been told about your own worth over the years. But I need you to understand something clearly. This is not temporary. This is not a mistake. I do not make declarations of this magnitude carelessly. His certainty, though reassuring, did little to fully quiet the anxious voice in the back of Elena's mind, the voice shaped by years of being told she would never be enough. She had spent so long believing herself unworthy of recognition that accepting genuine worth felt almost as difficult as enduring the years of dismissal that preceded it. I want to believe you, she said honestly, but it is difficult to unlearn years of being told otherwise. Cade rose from his chair and moved closer, kneeling slightly so their eyes met at a more even level. Then allow me to help you unlearn it, he said. Not through words alone, but through actions. I do not expect you to trust everything I say immediately. I only ask that you give yourself the chance to discover what this bond truly means, without the weight of everyone else's past judgments clouding your perception. Elena nodded slowly, something in his steady patience easing the knot of anxiety in her chest, even if only slightly. What happens today? She asked, eager to shift toward practical matters rather than continuing to dwell on emotional uncertainty. Today, Cade said, straightening, you will begin preparing to leave Ashfall Pack and travel with me to my territory. It is customary for a newly marked mate to reside within the Alpha Zone lands, particularly given the significance of your position now. The suggestion caught Elena off guard. Leave Ashfall entirely? She asked. I have never lived anywhere else. I understand this is a significant change, Cade said, but remaining here, surrounded by a pack that has treated you so poorly for so long, serves no purpose beneficial to either of us. My territory offers protection, resources, and an environment where you can begin discovering your full potential, without the shadow of years spent being dismissed. Elena considered this, weighing the strange mixture of relief and apprehension that came with the idea of leaving the only home she had ever known. Ashfall Pack held little affection for her, certainly, but it remained familiar, and familiarity carried its own quiet comfort even amid hardship. When would we leave? She asked. Within the next few days, Cade said. There are matters here requiring my attention first, including addressing certain individuals who may require a clearer understanding of how things will proceed going forward. Elena suspected he meant Felix Ashworth specifically, though she did not press the matter further. Instead, she focused on the tea still warming her hands, allowing herself a moment to simply breathe amid the whirlwind of changes reshaping her entire existence within the span of a single day. I should speak with my family before we leave, she said eventually. Regardless of everything that has happened between us, I do not wish to depart without at least attempting some form of resolution. Cade nodded, respecting her request without argument. Take whatever time you need, he said, though I would ask that you allow me to accompany you, given the circumstances. Elena considered this, then nodded in agreement. Facing her family alone had never yielded particularly comforting results, and she suspected having Cade present might finally force a conversation that had been avoided for far too long. Later that morning, Elena found herself standing outside her family's private quarters, Cade beside her, his presence a steady, reassuring weight against the nervous energy coiling in her stomach. She knocked, and after a moment, her father, a quiet man named Daniel Voss who rarely involved himself in family disputes, opened the door. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Cade standing beside his daughter, and he quickly stepped aside, gesturing them into the small sitting room where Clara and Nora already waited, clearly having anticipated this conversation since the previous night's announcement. Elena, Clara said, rising from her seat with practiced composure. We were hoping to speak with you before your departure. That is precisely why we are here, Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. The room fell into an uneasy silence, 4 generations of complicated history hanging heavily in the air, waiting for someone to finally break the pattern that had defined this family for as long as Elena could remember. I want to understand something, Elena said finally, addressing her mother directly. For years I was told my wolf would never fully emerge, that I was a disappointment to this family's reputation. I was given the lowest tasks, excluded from gatherings, and reminded constantly that I would never measure up to Nora or to any other wolf within this pack. I want to know whether any of you ever once considered that perhaps the way I was treated contributed to why my wolf remained hidden for so long. Clara's composure faltered slightly. Elena, we did what we believed was necessary given the circumstances. Your wolf failed to emerge during your first shift, and subsequent attempts showed little improvement. We could not simply ignore that reality. You could have supported me instead of shaming me, Elena said. There is a difference between acknowledging a difficulty and treating someone as though they are fundamentally broken. Daniel, who had remained silent until this point, finally spoke, his voice quieter than his wife's but carrying an unexpected weight. She is right, Clara. We were harder on Elena than we ever were on Nora, and I allowed it to continue far longer than I should have. Clara turned to him, clearly surprised by his sudden willingness to voice disagreement after years of quiet deference. Daniel, this is not the time to revisit old decisions. This is precisely the time, Cade interjected, his voice calm but firm, drawing every eye in the room toward him. Elena has offered you an opportunity to acknowledge past mistakes honestly, rather than simply celebrating a change in circumstances that benefits this family's reputation. I would encourage you to take that opportunity seriously. Nora, who had remained unusually quiet since Elena and Cade's arrival, finally spoke, her voice smaller than Elena had ever heard it. I am sorry, she said. I know that means little after everything, but I am genuinely sorry, Elena. I told myself it was simply teasing, the way siblings sometimes treat each other, but I know it was crueler than that. I know I said things I should never have said. Elena studied her sister carefully, searching for sincerity beneath the apology. She found it, unexpectedly, in the genuine discomfort visible on Nora's face, discomfort that seemed to extend beyond mere concern for appearances. I appreciate you saying that, Elena said honestly. It does not erase the past, but it matters. Clara remained silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with pride and discomfort in equal measure, before finally speaking. I will admit, she said slowly, that perhaps we allowed our concerns about reputation to overshadow our responsibility to support you properly. I cannot undo the years already passed, but I can commit to treating you differently going forward, should you ever wish to maintain contact with this family. It was not the full acknowledgement Elena might have once hoped for, but given her mother's typically rigid demeanor, it represented significant movement. Elena nodded slowly, accepting the imperfect apology for what it was, rather than demanding a perfection unlikely to ever fully materialize. I will be leaving for Cade's territory within the next few days, Elena said. I do not know what our relationship will look like going forward, but I am willing to remain open to rebuilding something, provided the effort is genuine rather than motivated purely by my new position. Understood, Clara said quietly. Daniel stepped forward and, in a rare display of open affection, embraced his daughter briefly. I am proud of you, he said. I should have said that far more often over the years. Elena felt tears threatening at the unexpected warmth of the gesture, though she blinked them back, unwilling to appear overwhelmed in front of Cade and her family simultaneously. Thank you, she said softly. As they prepared to leave the room, Cade's hand found the small of Elena's back, a quiet gesture of support as she navigated the complicated emotions stirred by the conversation. Once outside in the corridor, she allowed herself a long, steadying breath. That went better than I expected, she admitted. You handled it with more grace than most would have managed, Cade said. It takes considerable strength to confront old wounds directly, rather than simply avoiding them. Elena considered his words as they walked back toward the guest chamber, the weight of the morning's conversations settling into something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like genuine progress rather than mere survival. By midday, word of the previous night's events had spread far beyond the walls of Ashfall Pack, carried by messengers and traveling wolves to every neighboring territory. Elena remained largely within the guest chamber throughout the morning, giving herself time to process the whirlwind of emotions from her family's conversation, while Cade attended to matters requiring his direct authority as Alpha King. She did not realize the full scope of what those matters entailed until Priya arrived that afternoon, practically breathless with news. You need to come see this, Priya said, pulling Elena toward the window overlooking the training grounds behind the pack house. The Alpha King has called the entire pack together. Elena peered through the glass and saw exactly what Priya described. Nearly every member of Ashfall Pack had gathered on the open field below, standing in loose clusters as Cade addressed them from a raised platform typically reserved for pack announcements. Even from this distance, Elena could sense the weight of authority radiating from his stance. What is he saying? Elena asked, though the window muffled most of the words. Come, Priya urged. We should hear this directly. They hurried down through the pack house and out onto the training grounds, arriving just as Cade's voice carried clearly across the assembled crowd. And let it be understood, he was saying, that the treatment Elena Voss has received within this pack over the years was not merely unfortunate. It was unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on every leader who allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves, some exchanging uncertain glances, others nodding as though recognizing an uncomfortable truth long overdue for acknowledgement. Elena felt a flush of embarrassment at hearing her personal history discussed so openly. Though beneath the discomfort, something steadier began to take root, a quiet recognition that perhaps this public reckoning was necessary. I understand that mating pools sometimes select wolves whose full potential has not yet been recognized, Cade continued. This does not diminish the legitimacy of the bond. If anything, it reveals how easily this pack has overlooked genuine strength in favor of superficial judgments about rank and status. Elena spotted her mother and Nora standing near the edge of the crowd, both visibly uncomfortable with the public nature of Cade's address, though neither dared voice objection given the setting. Nearby, Felix Ashworth stood with arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena could sense the tension simmering beneath his composed exterior. Going forward, Cade said, his voice hardening slightly, any wolf found treating Elena with disrespect will answer directly to me. This is not a suggestion. This is a clear expectation, and I do not make exceptions for those who believe their rank exempts them from basic decency. He paused, allowing his words to settle over the crowd before continuing. I recognize that adjusting long-held assumptions takes time. I am not asking for immediate affection or friendship toward Elena. I am asking for basic respect, the kind every wolf within this pack deserves regardless of their perceived rank. Elena felt Priya's hand find hers, a small gesture of support as they stood together watching the scene unfold. Around them, several pack members glanced their way, some with expressions of genuine reassessment, others still clinging visibly to skepticism. Cade's gaze swept across the crowd one final time before settling briefly on Felix Ashworth. I understand certain individuals may feel this development disrupts plans they had privately considered for their own advancement, he said, his tone carrying an unmistakable edge. I would encourage such individuals to reconsider any lingering resentment, given the consequences of allowing personal ambition to interfere with basic loyalty. Felix's jaw tightened, though he offered no verbal response, clearly recognizing the danger of contradicting the Alpha King openly before the entire gathered pack. Elena noticed several nearby wolves shift subtly away from him, as though sensing the tension and choosing not to associate themselves with whatever resentment he harbored. This gathering is concluded, Cade announced. I trust everyone present understands my expectations clearly. The crowd began dispersing slowly, quiet conversations breaking out in small clusters as wolves processed the significant address they had just witnessed. Elena remained near the edge of the training grounds, watching as Cade stepped down from the platform and made his way toward her. That was more direct than I expected, she said, as he approached. Subtlety rarely resolves deep-seated prejudice, Cade replied. Sometimes clarity, however uncomfortable, serves a greater purpose. I appreciate what you did, Elena said, though I confess it felt strange hearing my private struggles discussed so publicly. Cade's expression softened with understanding. I recognize that discomfort, and I apologize if it felt invasive, but I believed it necessary for this pack to hear clearly that your treatment was unacceptable, rather than allowing whispered rumors to distort the truth of what happened. Elena considered this, recognizing the wisdom behind his reasoning even as the lingering discomfort remained. I understand, she said. I simply hope it does not create additional resentment that follows me, even after we leave for your territory. Any resentment that follows, Cade said firmly, will be addressed the same way I addressed it today. Directly, and without hesitation. As they walked back toward the pack house together, Elena noticed several wolves who had previously ignored her entirely now offering hesitant nods of acknowledgement, small gestures that would have felt impossible only a day earlier. She did not mistake these gestures for genuine warmth, understanding that most stemmed from newfound caution rather than authentic respect, but even cautious acknowledgement represented a significant departure from years of open dismissal. Later that evening, as the pack house settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Elena found herself sitting near the window of her guest chamber, watching the last light fade from the sky. Cade had left to attend additional matters requiring his attention, promising to return before departure preparations began the following morning. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she opened the door to find Owen Whitfield, the beta who had offered the first respectful acknowledgement during the previous night's feast, standing in the corridor. I hope I am not intruding, he said. I wanted to speak with you privately, if you have a moment. Elena stepped aside, allowing him entry, curious about the purpose of his visit. Of course, she said. Owen entered, and remained standing near the doorway, his posture respectful, though carrying an evident seriousness. I wanted to offer my genuine congratulations, he said, separate from the formal courtesies expected during last night's feast. I have known Cade for many years, since before he assumed the role of Alpha King, and I have never witnessed him react to anyone the way he reacted to you." "Thank you," Elena said, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "I also wanted to offer a word of caution," Owen continued. "Cade's position carries significant political weight, and not everyone within the Western Territory will welcome this development as easily as those present at last night's feast. There are pack leaders who hoped Cade would eventually form an alliance through a more traditional mating arrangement, one that would strengthen political ties between established lineages." Elena felt a flicker of unease at this new consideration, one she had not fully processed amid the emotional weight of the previous day's events. "Are you suggesting there could be genuine opposition to this bond?" "I am suggesting caution rather than alarm," Owen said carefully. "Cade is more than capable of managing political resistance, and his authority within the territory remains largely unchallenged. But I believe it would serve you well to understand the full landscape you are entering, rather than remaining unaware of the complexities involved." Elena appreciated the honesty, even as it added another layer of uncertainty to an already overwhelming transition. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I would rather understand the challenges ahead than remain naively unprepared." Owen nodded approvingly. "I suspect you will handle whatever challenges arise with more resilience than many anticipate," he said. "Cade's wolf does not choose carelessly, and I have learned over the years to trust that judgment even when I do not immediately understand its reasoning." After Owen departed, Elena remained by the window for a long while, considering everything she had learned throughout the day. The pack's public reckoning, her family's fragile steps toward reconciliation, and now the quiet warning about political complications awaiting her within Cade's own territory, all swirled together into a complicated tapestry of uncertainty and cautious hope. She thought of the mark still tender at her neck, the physical reminder of a bond that had upended her entire existence within the span of a single day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she understood there would be no simple path forward, no easy transition from the invisible reject she had once been into the recognized mate of the Alpha King. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena found herself willing to face those challenges directly, rather than retreating into the familiar safety of being overlooked. Later that night, unable to settle her restless thoughts, Elena wandered down toward the Packhouse Library, a quiet room rarely used by anyone other than the Pack's elder historian. She hoped the stillness might help calm her racing mind before the departure preparations began the following morning. Instead, she found the room already occupied. Cade stood near the far window, his back to the door, speaking in low, controlled tones to someone Elena recognized immediately as Felix Ashworth. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether to interrupt, but something in the tension of the room held her still. "You will not speak against her again," Cade was saying, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "Not to other pack members, not in private conversation, not even in passing comment disguised as harmless observation. Do you understand me clearly?" Felix's posture remained stiff, though his usual arrogance had visibly diminished in the presence of the Alpha King's direct confrontation. "I understand, Your Majesty. I simply believed my concerns were worth voicing, given the unprecedented nature of this situation." "Your concerns were voiced publicly, in a manner designed to undermine a bond you had no authority to question," Cade replied. "I am willing to overlook this once, given the shock of the announcement. I will not overlook it a second time." "Understood," Felix said, his voice tight. "I am aware of your ambitions within this pack," Cade continued. "I have no objection to wolves seeking advancement through legitimate means. But should I discover that your ambitions have led you to undermine Elena's position, whether through rumor, exclusion, or any other subtle method available to someone of your rank, you will find your ambitions permanently curtailed. Is that clear enough for you?" Felix nodded stiffly, clearly recognizing the finality in Cade's tone. "Perfectly clear, Your Majesty." "Good," Cade said. "You may go." Felix departed quickly, brushing past Elena in the doorway without acknowledgement, his expression carefully blank, though his shoulders remained tense with barely suppressed frustration. Cade turned at the sound of the door, his expression shifting from stern authority to gentler concern the moment he recognized Elena standing there. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," Elena said, stepping fully into the room. "I did not realize you intended to confront him directly." "I believed a private conversation would carry more weight than another public reprimand," Cade said. "Felix responds poorly to public humiliation, but private consequences tend to register more effectively with wolves of his particular temperament." Elena considered this, appreciating the careful calculation behind his approach. "Do you believe he will actually listen?" "I believe he understands the consequences clearly enough to restrain his behavior, at least outwardly," Cade said. "Whether his resentment fades entirely is a separate matter. one I cannot control through threats alone. But I can ensure his resentment does not translate into actions that harm you. Elena moved closer, studying the tired lines beginning to show at the edges of Cade's expression, evidence of a long day spent managing the political and emotional fallout from the previous night's announcement. You have spent this entire day defending me, she said quietly, to the pack, to my family, and now to Felix directly. I imagine that has been exhausting. It has been necessary, Cade said simply. I do not consider necessary actions exhausting, even when they require considerable effort. Elena smiled faintly at his steady conviction, a quality she was beginning to recognize as fundamental to his character rather than mere posturing for her benefit. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Cade reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You do not need to thank me for treating you the way you always deserve to be treated, he said. That should have been the standard from the beginning, regardless of whether the mating pool had ever brought us together. They remained together in the quiet library for a while longer, the tension of the day slowly easing into a comfortable silence. Neither felt compelled to fill with unnecessary conversation. Elena found herself grateful for the stillness, a rare moment of calm amid the whirlwind reshaping her entire existence, and she allowed herself, if only briefly, to simply exist within it, without anticipating whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. The carriage rolled steadily along the forest road, carrying Elena away from Ashfall Pack for the first time in her entire life. She watched through the small window as familiar landscapes gradually gave way to unfamiliar territory. Dense pine forests stretching endlessly toward the horizon, the road winding deeper into lands she had only ever heard described in stories. Cade sat across from her, occasionally glancing up from a stack of documents he had been reviewing since their departure that morning, his expression thoughtful rather than troubled. Elena appreciated the quiet companionship, though her own thoughts remained anything but calm. You have grown quiet, Cade observed, setting the documents aside. I am thinking, Elena admitted, about everything I am leaving behind, and everything I do not yet understand about where I am going. Would it help to talk through some of those thoughts? Cade asked. Elena considered his offer, uncertain how to organize the tangled mixture of memories and anxieties currently occupying her mind. I keep thinking about my first shift, she said eventually. The day everything changed for me, though not in the way it should have. Cade's expression grew attentive, sensing the significance of what she was about to share. Tell me, he said gently. Elena took a steadying breath, memories she had buried for years slowly surfacing to the forefront of her mind. I was 12 years old, she began. Younger than most wolves experienced their first shift, though not unheard of for early developers. The entire family gathered to witness it, as tradition demands. Nora had already completed her first shift the previous year, transitioning smoothly and effortlessly, exactly as expected of the family's golden child. And your shift did not proceed the same way, Cade said quietly, already anticipating the painful direction of the memory. It did not proceed at all, Elena said. I remember the pain, the pressure building beneath my skin, exactly as everyone described, but the actual transformation never occurred. I remained human, trembling and exhausted, while my entire family watched in confused silence. My mother's expression that day has haunted me ever since. It was not simply disappointment, it was something closer to disgust. Cade's jaw tightened, though he remained silent, allowing Elena the space to continue without interruption. After that day, Elena continued, everything changed. My family began treating me differently, distancing themselves as though my incomplete shift reflected some fundamental flaw within my character. I attempted the shift again several times over the following years, each attempt ending in the same painful failure. Eventually, everyone simply stopped expecting anything different, myself included. Did anyone ever attempt to understand why the shift failed to complete? Cade asked. Rather than simply accepting failure as evidence of inadequacy, Elena shook her head. Our pack healer examined me once, shortly after the initial failure, but found no physical explanation. After that, most people simply assumed I lacked whatever internal strength was necessary to complete the transformation. I began believing it myself, eventually. Cade reached across the carriage and gently took her hand, his thumb tracing careful circles against her palm. I do not believe your wolf failed to emerge due to any lack of strength, he said. I believe your wolf recognized an environment that offered no safety, no acceptance, nothing worth emerging for. Wolves do not simply manifest through raw willpower alone. They require a foundation of security and belonging to fully develop. Elena considered this perspective, one she had never encountered throughout years of being told her incomplete shift represented personal failure rather than environmental circumstance. Do you truly believe that? She asked. I have witnessed similar patterns before, Cade said. Wolves raised in unstable or unsupportive environments often experience delayed or incomplete shifts, not because they lack inherent strength, but because their wolf senses the absence of safety necessary for full emergence. Given everything you have described about your treatment within Ashfall Pack, I find it entirely unsurprising that your wolf remained hidden. The explanation settled over Elena with unexpected weight, reshaping years of internalized shame into something she had never allowed herself to consider. Perhaps her incomplete shift had never been evidence of her own inadequacy at all, but rather a reasonable response to an environment that offered nothing but cruelty and dismissal. If that is true, Elena said slowly, then perhaps my wolf might still emerge, given a different environment. I believe it absolutely will, Cade said, conviction evident in his voice. The mating bond itself often triggers significant changes in a wolf's development, and combined with a genuinely supportive environment, I would be surprised if your full shift did not eventually manifest. Elena felt a fragile hope kindling within her chest, one she had abandoned years ago as an impossible fantasy. The idea that her wolf might still emerge, that the years of failure might have stemmed from circumstance rather than permanent flaw, offered a perspective she had never dared consider previously. There is something else, she said quietly, memories continuing to surface now that she had begun sharing them. After the failed shift, my mother began comparing me constantly to Nora. Every meal, every gathering, every family conversation somehow circled back to my inadequacy, compared to my sister's natural abilities. I began avoiding family gatherings entirely by the time I turned 16, preferring isolation to enduring the constant comparisons. That must have been an incredibly lonely existence, Cade said, his voice softening further. It was, Elena admitted. I convinced myself eventually that loneliness was simply my natural state, that I was better suited to isolation than to genuine connection with others. It became easier to accept invisibility than to continue hoping for acceptance that never arrived. Cade remained quiet for a moment, processing the depth of what Elena had shared. I want you to understand something clearly, he said eventually. The isolation you experienced was never a reflection of your inherent worth. It was a reflection of the failures of those around you, people who should have recognized your value, and chose instead to dismiss it for reasons that had nothing to do with who you actually were. Elena felt tears threatening at the unexpected validation, years of carefully suppressed emotion suddenly finding an outlet she had never previously allowed herself. I do not know how to simply stop believing what I was taught for so long, she admitted. Even now, sitting here with you, part of me still expects this entire situation to somehow reveal itself as a mistake. That expectation will fade with time, Cade said gently. I do not anticipate you unlearning years of internalized doubt within a single conversation, or even within a single week. But I intend to remain patient, offering consistent reassurance until those old wounds finally begin healing, rather than continuing to define how you view yourself. The carriage continued its steady progress through the forest, the afternoon light filtering through the canopy above, in shifting patterns across the interior. Elena remained quiet for a while, processing the weight of everything she had shared, grateful for Cade's patient willingness to listen without judgment or dismissal. Thank you for listening, she said eventually. I have never spoken about any of this so openly before. I am honored that you trusted me enough to share it, Cade replied. And I want you to know that whatever wounds Ashfall Pack left behind, I intend to help you heal them, for as long as it takes. As the carriage continued deeper into Cade's territory, Elena felt something shifting within her. A cautious willingness to imagine a future substantially different from the isolated, dismissed existence she had endured for so many years. The road ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges she could not yet fully anticipate, but for the first time and longer than she could remember, uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like genuine possibility. By late afternoon, the forest began thinning, revealing glimpses of a sprawling territory unlike anything Elena had witnessed within the confines of Ashfall Pack. Stone buildings rose along a gentle hillside, their architecture more refined than anything she had known, while cultivated fields stretched toward distant mountains, still capped with the last remnants of winter snow. The carriage passed through a series of watchtowers manned by alert guards who straightened immediately at the sight of Cade's insignia, offering respectful salutes as they continued along the main road toward what Elena assumed was the central packhouse. "This is your territory," she said, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "Our territory," Cade corrected gently. "You are its Alpha Queen now, whether or not that title feels comfortable to you yet." Elena absorbed the correction slowly, the weight of the words settling strangely against years of being called nothing more significant than a servant. The carriage eventually arrived at a grand entrance, considerably more impressive than Ashfall's modest pack house, where a small gathering of staff and advisors waited to receive them. A woman with warm brown skin and kind eyes stepped forward first, offering a graceful bow before addressing Cade directly. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," she said, then turned her attention to Elena with a genuine smile that immediately eased some of Elena's nervous tension. "And welcome to you as well. I am Ivy Marlowe, head of household here. We received word of your arrival and have prepared accordingly." "Thank you," Elena said, grateful for the warmth in Ivy's greeting, a stark contrast to the suspicious glances she had grown accustomed to receiving throughout her life. "I understand this must feel overwhelming," Ivy continued, guiding them through the entrance hall as guards unloaded the carriage behind them. "Please know that everyone here has been instructed to make your transition as comfortable as possible. If you require anything at all, do not hesitate to ask." As they moved deeper into the pack house, Elena noticed the atmosphere felt distinctly different from Ashfall, staff moving with purposeful efficiency rather than anxious tension, occasional laughter drifting from nearby rooms rather than the hushed, careful silence she associated with her former home. Several wolves passed them in the corridor, each offering respectful acknowledgement toward Cade and curious, but not unkind glances toward Elena. "The pack here seems different," Elena observed quietly, once Ivy had stepped away to attend to preparations. "I have worked to cultivate an environment built on mutual respect, rather than rigid hierarchy," Cade said. "It does not mean this pack is without flaws, but I believe you will find considerably less cruelty here than what you experienced at Ashfall." They continued toward what Cade explained were the private quarters reserved for the Alpha and his mate, a suite of rooms considerably grander than anything Elena had ever occupied. Large windows overlooked the training grounds and gardens beyond, filling the space with natural light that made the entire suite feel airy rather than confined. "This is where you will be staying," Cade said, watching her reaction carefully. "I understand this is a significant adjustment from what you are accustomed to." Elena moved slowly through the space, running her fingers along the polished wood of a writing desk, taking in the carefully arranged furnishings that reflected considerable thought and preparation. "It is beautiful," she admitted, "though I confess it still feels somewhat unreal, as though I might wake up any moment back in the servants' quarters at Ashfall." "Give it time," Cade said gently. "Reality has a way of eventually asserting itself, even when circumstances shift as dramatically as they have for you recently." A soft knock interrupted them, and a young woman entered carrying fresh linens, offering a friendly smile toward Elena before addressing Cade with practiced efficiency. "The evening meal will be ready within the hour, Your Majesty. Shall I have it brought to the private dining room, given the long journey?" "That would be appreciated, thank you," Cade said, and the young woman departed with another warm smile toward Elena. "Everyone here seems remarkably kind," Elena observed once they were alone again. "I have worked hard to ensure this pack operates differently from many others," Cade said. "Cruelty and hierarchy often go hand in hand within traditional pack structures, but I have never believed strength requires cruelty as its foundation. I would rather lead a pack built on genuine loyalty than one built on fear." Elena considered this philosophy, recognizing how starkly it contrasted with everything she had known growing up within Ashfall's rigid, unforgiving structure. "I think I could grow to appreciate a place like this," she said quietly. "I hope you will grow to consider it home," Cade replied, "not simply a place you reside, but somewhere you genuinely belong." As evening settled over the territory, Elena found herself standing at the window of her new chambers, watching the last light fade behind distant mountains, the unfamiliar landscape slowly beginning to feel less foreign, and more like the beginning of something entirely new. The wounds of her past remained, tender and unresolved, but for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where those wounds might eventually heal, rather than continuing to define her entirely. Weeks passed, as Elena gradually settled into the rhythms of her new life within Cade's territory. Each morning began with quiet breakfasts shared with Cade before he attended to his duties, and each afternoon brought new discoveries about the pack she now called home. Ivy Marlowe had become something of a friend, patiently teaching her the customs and expectations of her new position, without ever treating her ignorance as embarrassing. Even so, one persistent absence continued to weigh on Elena's mind. Her wolf remained silent. "Do not force it," Cade advised one evening as they walked together through the training grounds, the setting sun casting long shadows across the open field. "I have watched you grow more confident with each passing day. Your wolf will emerge when it is ready, not when you demand it." "It has been weeks," Elena said, frustration evident in her voice. "I feel stronger than I have in years. More settled, more accepted. Yet still nothing changes." Cade stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Healing does not follow a predictable timeline," he said, You spent years believing yourself broken. Unlearning that belief takes time, even when your circumstances have genuinely changed. Elena sighed, recognizing the truth in his words even as impatience continued gnawing at her. I suppose I hoped the bond alone would be enough, she admitted. That simply being marked, simply being accepted, would immediately unlock whatever remained hidden within me. Perhaps it requires something more active, Cade suggested. Rather than waiting passively for your wolf to emerge, what if you approach the process differently? Training, physical exertion, deliberate attempts to connect with whatever instincts remain buried beneath years of suppression. Elena considered this suggestion, recalling how her previous attempts at shifting had always occurred within the rigid, judgmental atmosphere of Ashfall's formal ceremonies, never within a private setting free from scrutiny. Would you be willing to help me try again? She asked. Here, without an audience, without expectations hanging over the outcome. I would be honored, Cade said. They continued deeper into the training grounds, arriving at a secluded clearing surrounded by tall pines that Cade explained he sometimes used for private reflection. The area felt peaceful, isolated from the rest of the pack house, exactly the kind of environment Elena suspected her wolf might respond to more favorably than the anxious, watchful atmosphere she had always associated with attempted shifts. Close your eyes, Cade instructed gently. Do not think about the shift itself. Think instead about how you feel right now, in this moment, standing here with me. Elena obeyed, closing her eyes and allowing herself to simply exist within the present moment, rather than dwelling on years of accumulated failure. She focused on the steady warmth of Cade's presence beside her, the gentle rustle of pine branches overhead, the quiet absence of judgment that had followed her throughout every previous attempt. What do you feel? Cade asked softly. Safe, Elena said, surprising herself with the immediate honesty of the response. I feel safe, for what might be the first time in longer than I can remember. Good, Cade said. Now, without forcing anything, simply allow yourself to imagine your wolf, not as a failure, not as something broken, but as a part of yourself that has simply been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Elena breathed slowly, allowing her mind to drift toward the possibility she had abandoned years ago, the image of her wolf finally taking shape, rather than remaining a source of shame and disappointment. She felt something stir beneath her skin, faint at first, easily dismissible as imagination, but gradually growing stronger with each passing moment. Something is happening, she whispered, her eyes still closed, afraid that opening them might disrupt whatever fragile process had begun. I know, Cade said, his voice filled with quiet wonder. I can feel it as well, through the bond. Do not stop now. Let it continue. The sensation intensified, a warmth spreading from her chest outward, followed by a pressure building beneath her skin exactly as it had during her failed attempts as a child, though this time the pressure carried no accompanying dread, only anticipation. Elena's breathing quickened, her body beginning to tremble, though not from fear. Trust it, Cade encouraged. Whatever happens next, trust that your wolf knows exactly what it is doing. Elena released the last remnants of doubt she had carried for years, allowing herself fully to embrace the sensation building within her, rather than fighting against it, as she had unconsciously done during every previous attempt. The pressure crested suddenly, overwhelming, and Elena felt her body shift in a way it never had before, bones and muscle rearranging with a speed and fluidity she had always believed impossible for herself. When the transformation completed, Elena stood on 4 paws for the first time in her life, her wolf form finally manifesting after years of dormant potential. She was smaller than many wolves, her fur a soft silver gray that seemed to catch the fading evening light, but she was undeniably, completely present. Cade's own transformation followed moments later, his massive silver-black wolf form emerging with practiced ease, considerably larger than Elena's newly discovered shape, though his posture radiated only warmth and pride rather than any sense of comparison or judgment. Elena took a tentative step forward, marveling at the unfamiliar sensation of 4 legs beneath her, the heightened awareness of scents and sounds that flooded her senses in ways her human form had never allowed. She let out a small, uncertain sound, something between a whimper and a bark, overwhelmed by the sudden reality of achieving something she had believed impossible for her entire life. Cade's wolf moved closer, nuzzling gently against her in a gesture of clear affection and celebration, and Elena felt an overwhelming surge of emotion that had nothing to do with sadness, tears she might have shed threatening instead from pure, unexpected joy. They remained together in their wolf forms for a long while, exploring the secluded clearing as the last light faded into evening darkness, Elena gradually growing more confident with each passing moment, testing the boundaries of her newfound abilities with a mixture of caution and delight. When they finally shifted back to their human forms, Elena found herself laughing, an unfamiliar sound that felt entirely appropriate given the magnitude of what had just occurred. "I did it," she said, still catching her breath from the exertion and emotion of the transformation. "After all these years, I actually did it." "You did," Cade said, pulling her into an embrace that conveyed more genuine pride than words could adequately express. "I told you your wolf simply needed the right environment to finally emerge." Elena leaned into the embrace, allowing herself fully to absorb the significance of the moment. "I spent so many years believing something was fundamentally wrong with me," she said, "believing my failure to shift reflected some permanent flaw in my character. And now you know the truth," Cade said. "Your wolf was never broken, it was simply waiting for a place worth emerging into." They walked back toward the pack house together, Elena's steps lighter than they had been in years, the weight of accumulated shame finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. As they approached the main building, Ivy Marlowe spotted them from a nearby window and rushed outside, clearly noticing something different in Elena's bearing immediately. "What happened?" Ivy asked, her expression alight with curiosity. "My wolf finally emerged," Elena said, still marveling at how naturally the words came, no longer weighted with years of shame or hesitation. Ivy's face broke into a wide smile, and she embraced Elena warmly, an unexpected display of affection that Elena welcomed without hesitation. "This calls for celebration," Ivy declared. "I will inform the kitchen immediately. Tonight, we feast properly." As word spread through the pack house that evening, wolves who had previously offered only polite, cautious acknowledgement, now approached Elena with genuine warmth, curious about her wolf form, eager to welcome her fully into the pack's community. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, so starkly different from the isolation she had endured throughout her life at Ashfall. Later that night, exhausted but profoundly content, Elena sat with Cade in their private chambers, reflecting on the extraordinary transformation of not only her physical form, but of her entire understanding of herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in me, even when I could not believe in myself." "Thank your own wolf," Cade replied gently. "It found the courage to emerge the moment it recognized a place finally worth belonging to. That courage was always within you, Elena. It simply needed the right circumstances to reveal itself." Elena smiled, resting her head against his shoulder, the weight of years of shame finally beginning to feel like a distant memory rather than an inescapable present reality. Whatever challenges remained ahead, she understood now, with unshakable certainty, that she was no longer the wolf everyone had once dismissed as worthless. She was simply, finally, herself. The celebration Ivy had promised materialized within a few short hours, the great hall of Cade's pack house filling with warmth and laughter unlike anything Elena had witnessed during her years at Ashfall. Long tables were quickly arranged with an impressive spread of food, and pack members gathered eagerly, genuinely delighted by the news of Elena's emergence rather than merely offering the cautious, obligatory acknowledgement she had grown accustomed to expecting. A young man named Lucas Bennett, one of the pack's trainers, approached Elena early in the evening with an enthusiastic grin. "I heard your wolf is silver gray," he said. "That is a rare coloring within this territory. Most of our wolves carry darker tones, closer to brown or black." "Is that significant?" Elena asked, still unfamiliar with many of the customs surrounding wolf coloring and its meaning within pack culture. "Some say silver-gray wolves carry particular sensitivity to emotional currents within a pack," Lucas explained. "An old belief, perhaps more superstition than fact, but it seems fitting given everything Ivy has told us about your journey." Elena smiled, appreciating the warmth behind his words, so different from the mockery she might have expected from a similar conversation back at Ashfall. Throughout the evening, she found herself engaging in similarly friendly exchanges, pack members curious and welcoming rather than judgmental, each interaction slowly chipping away at the defensive walls she had constructed over years of enduring cruelty. Cade remained close beside her throughout most of the celebration, though he occasionally stepped away to address matters requiring his attention as Alpha King. During one such absence, Elena noticed Owen Whitfield had traveled from his own territory to attend the celebration, likely informed by messenger of the significant development in her journey. "I hear congratulations are in order," Owen said, approaching with a warm smile. "I must say, I did not expect news of your wolf's emergence to arrive quite this quickly." "Neither did I," Elena admitted. "It seems this territory offered exactly what I needed, in ways I never could have anticipated." "Cade has always possessed a particular talent for creating environments where wolves genuinely flourish," Owen said. "I suspect that talent played no small role in your wolf finally finding the courage to emerge." As their conversation continued, Elena noticed Owen's expression grow momentarily serious. I do want to mention, he said carefully, that word of your transformation will likely spread quickly throughout the territory. Given how remarkable such a delayed emergence truly is, I would encourage some caution regarding how this news reaches certain corners of the Western lands. You mean Felix Ashworth, Elena said, recalling Owen's earlier warning about political complications surrounding her bond with Cade. Among others, Owen said, though I do not wish to dampen tonight's celebration with such concerns. I simply believe forewarned wolves tend to navigate challenges more effectively than those caught entirely unaware. Elena appreciated the warning, tucking it carefully into the back of her mind even as she returned her attention to the joyful atmosphere surrounding her. Whatever challenges Owen's caution hinted toward, she felt considerably more prepared to face them now, armed with the confidence of finally possessing a fully realized wolf, and the unwavering support of a mate who had never once doubted her worth. As the celebration continued late into the night, Elena found herself dancing clumsily but joyfully, with several pack members eager to include her in their festivities, laughing freely in a way she could not recall ever experiencing during her years at Ashfall. When Cade finally returned to her side, his expression carried unmistakable warmth as he watched her laugh among her new pack. You look happy, he observed, drawing her gently away from the dancing, toward a quieter corner of the hall. I am happy, Elena said, and she meant it fully, without reservation or hidden doubt. I do not think I have ever felt this way before, surrounded by people who seem to genuinely want me here. They do want you here, Cade said, and they will continue wanting you here long after tonight's celebration fades into memory. Elena rested against him, watching the celebration continue around them, the warmth of the hall and the genuine affection surrounding her, a stark contrast to the isolation that had defined so much of her previous existence. Whatever political complications Owen had hinted toward, whatever resentment Felix Ashworth continued harboring somewhere back at Ashfall, Elena understood that she now possessed something far more valuable than she had ever known before. She possessed belonging, genuine and unshakable, and a wolf finally free to express the strength that had always existed within her, patiently waiting for the right moment to emerge. Several weeks after the celebration of her wolf's emergence, Elena had settled into a comfortable rhythm within Cade's territory, spending mornings training alongside Lucas Bennett to strengthen her newfound wolf form, and afternoons learning the administrative responsibilities expected of an alpha queen. The initial wonder of her transformation had gradually given way to steady, quiet confidence, though Owen's earlier warning about political complications continued lingering at the edges of her thoughts. She did not have to wait long before those concerns materialized into something concrete. There is a matter requiring your attention, Cade said one morning, entering their private chambers with a folded letter in hand, his expression carrying attention Elena had not seen since their arrival at his territory. What is it? She asked, setting aside the ledger she had been reviewing. A letter from Marcus Whitlock, Alpha of the Redmore Pack, Cade said, handing her the parchment. He has requested a formal meeting to discuss what he terms concerns regarding the legitimacy of our bond. Elena read through the letter quickly, her stomach tightening as she absorbed the carefully worded but unmistakably hostile language questioning whether a wolf with such a significantly delayed shift could truly represent a legitimate mating bond, rather than some manipulation or error that threatened the stability of alliances across the Western Territory. He believes I tricked you, Elena said, setting the letter down with more force than necessary, or that this bond is somehow fraudulent. Marcus Whitlock has long harbored ambitions of strengthening his own political standing through a strategic alliance, Cade explained. I suspect he had hoped I would eventually choose a mate from a pack capable of offering significant political or military advantage. Your bond disrupted those calculations considerably. What does he intend to do? Elena asked, apprehension creeping into her voice, despite her efforts to remain composed. He has requested a formal audience before the Territorial Council, Cade said, a gathering of pack leaders from across the Western lands, convened to address disputes of significant consequence. He intends to formally challenge the legitimacy of our bond. Elena felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest, old fears resurfacing despite the considerable progress she had made since arriving at Cade's territory. Can he actually succeed in such a challenge? She asked. Can the council somehow dissolve a mating bond? No mating bond can be forcibly dissolved, Cade said firmly. The bond itself is beyond any council's authority to alter. However, Marcus could potentially succeed in undermining your standing politically, casting sufficient doubt to weaken your position and influence within the broader territory, even if the bond itself remains intact. Elena absorbed this explanation, understanding the distinction between the bond's undeniable reality and the more fragile matter of political perception and acceptance. When would this audience take place? She asked. Within 2 weeks, Cade said. Enough time to prepare adequately, though not so much time that anxiety would have excessive opportunity to fester. Elena appreciated his attempt at reassurance, though the prospect of standing before an assembly of skeptical pack leaders, forced once again to defend her worth against accusations of manipulation or fraud, stirred uncomfortably familiar echoes of her years at Ashfall. I will need to prepare thoroughly, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. I do not intend to face this challenge unprepared. I will help however I can, Cade said, though I suspect much of the actual confrontation will require you to speak for yourself, rather than relying entirely on my defense. The council will want to hear directly from you, to assess your character and conviction firsthand. The weight of this responsibility settled heavily over Elena as the following days passed in careful preparation. She spent hours with Owen Whitfield, who traveled to Cade's territory specifically to help her understand the political intricacies of the Territorial Council, the histories and motivations of various pack leaders likely to attend, and the arguments Marcus Whitlock might employ to strengthen his challenge. Marcus will likely emphasize your background, Owen explained during one such session, the two of them seated in the Packhouse library, surrounded by scrolls detailing decades of territorial politics. He will attempt to portray you as unprepared for the responsibilities of your new position, using your years as a servant within Ashfall as evidence of insufficient standing. That seems a rather transparent strategy, Elena observed. Surely the council will recognize such an argument as prejudiced rather than substantive. Some will, Owen agreed. Others, unfortunately, remain heavily invested in traditional hierarchies that value rank and lineage above genuine character. You should prepare yourself for pointed, occasionally insulting questions designed specifically to provoke a reaction that might be used as further evidence against you. Elena absorbed this warning carefully, recognizing the familiar pattern of cruelty disguised as legitimate concern, a strategy she had witnessed countless times throughout her years at Ashfall. I have faced this kind of treatment before, she said. Perhaps not on this scale, but the underlying tactics remain familiar. That familiarity may serve you well, Owen said. Wolves who have never faced such deliberate provocation often struggle to maintain composure under similar pressure. You unfortunately possess considerable experience navigating exactly this type of hostility. Elena found a strange, bitter comfort in Owen's observation, recognizing that the very cruelty she had endured for years might now serve as unexpected preparation for the challenge awaiting her before the Territorial Council. She continued her preparations with renewed determination, practicing responses to anticipated questions, studying the histories of the packs likely to attend, and working alongside Lucas to ensure her wolf form remained strong and controlled, should any physical demonstration of her legitimacy become necessary. One evening, as preparations continued, Elena received an unexpected visitor. Nora arrived at the Packhouse, having traveled from Ashfall specifically to offer support ahead of the upcoming council session. I heard about Marcus Whitlock's challenge, Nora said, finding Elena in the training grounds after a long afternoon session with Lucas. I wanted to see you before the audience, to offer whatever support I could. Elena studied her sister carefully, still adjusting to the genuine warmth Nora had displayed since their difficult conversation weeks earlier. Thank you for coming, she said. Though I confess I am surprised you traveled all this way. I have spent the past several weeks reflecting on our relationship, Nora said, on how differently I might have treated you, had I recognized your worth sooner, rather than dismissing you the way I did for so many years. I cannot undo that past, but I can at least ensure you know I stand firmly beside you now, particularly as you face this unfair challenge. Elena felt genuine warmth at her sister's words, a stark departure from the cruelty that had defined so much of their shared history. That means more to me than you likely realize, she said. I also wanted to offer something else, Nora continued, reaching into a satchel she carried and producing a small, worn journal. This belonged to our grandmother, before she passed. I found it recently while sorting through some of Mother's old belongings. It contains her reflections on her own delayed shift, and how she eventually overcame the doubts surrounding her legitimacy within her own pack. Elena accepted the journal carefully, surprised by this revelation. Our grandmother experienced a delayed shift as well? Apparently so, Nora said, though the family rarely spoke of it, likely out of the same shame that surrounded your own experience. I thought perhaps her words might offer some comfort, or at least evidence that you are not the first in our family to face such doubts. Elena thanked her sister warmly, tucking the journal away to read more thoroughly once she found a quiet moment alone. The unexpected gift, combined with Nora's genuine support, offered a small but meaningful comfort as the date of the Territorial Council's audience continued approaching. As the 2 weeks of preparation drew toward their conclusion, Elena felt a complicated mixture of anxiety and determination settling over her. The upcoming challenge represented far more than a simple political dispute. It represented, in many ways, a continuation of the same battle she had fought her entire life, the struggle to prove her worth against those determined to dismiss her regardless of evidence or circumstance. But this time, she understood, she would not face that battle alone, isolated and unsupported, as she had been for so many years. She would face it with Cade beside her, with Nora's unexpected support, with Owen's careful guidance, and with a wolf finally strong enough to stand firmly against whatever doubts the Territorial Council intended to raise against her. That night, once the pack house had grown quiet, Elena settled into a chair near the window of her chambers and opened her grandmother's journal for the first time. The handwriting was small and careful, faded slightly with age, but still legible enough for Elena to read through several entries before her eyes grew heavy with sleep. Her grandmother, a woman named Freya Voss, had experienced her own delayed shift at the age of 14, 2 years later than Elena's own failed attempt. The entries described years of quiet shame, of family gatherings endured in silence while relatives whispered about her inadequacy, echoes so familiar to Elena's own experience that she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. One entry, dated many years before Elena's birth, captured her attention particularly. They tell me my wolf will never emerge, that I am destined to remain incomplete for the remainder of my life. I have begun to believe them, though some small part of me refuses entirely to accept such a fate. I do not know what circumstance might finally allow my wolf to emerge, but I refuse to believe the fault lies within some permanent flaw in my own character. Perhaps I simply have not yet found the place, or the person, capable of offering what my wolf requires to finally feel safe enough to reveal itself. Elena read the passage several times, struck by how closely her grandmother's words mirrored sentiments Cade had expressed to her during their journey toward his territory. She continued reading, discovering that Freya's wolf had eventually emerged years later, after she left her original pack to marry a wolf from a distant territory, someone who had apparently offered the same patient support and genuine acceptance Elena herself had found within Cade. The final entries in the journal, written many years later, carried a tone of hard-won wisdom that settled deeply into Elena's chest. I understand now that my delayed shift was never a reflection of weakness, but rather a reflection of an environment that offered nothing worth emerging into. My wolf waited, patiently, for a place where she could finally exist without fear of judgment or rejection. I hope that whoever reads these words someday, should they face similar doubts, understands that their own worth was never diminished by circumstances beyond their control. Elena closed the journal carefully, holding it against her chest as she absorbed the profound comfort of discovering that her own struggles, so isolating and shameful for years, connected her to a grandmother she had barely known, a woman who had faced remarkably similar doubts, and emerged from them with hard-earned wisdom and strength. The following morning, as Elena shared the journal's contents with Cade over breakfast, he listened with quiet attentiveness, clearly moved by the parallel between Elena's journey and her grandmother's own experience. It seems this pattern runs deeper within your family than anyone previously acknowledged, he observed. Perhaps if your mother had understood her own mother's history more fully, she might have approached your delayed shift with considerably more compassion. Perhaps, Elena agreed, though I suspect shame has a way of silencing even the stories that might offer the most comfort, passed down through generations without anyone recognizing the pattern repeating itself. Later that same day, Owen arrived with troubling news that added further weight to the challenges awaiting Elena before the Territorial Council. I have learned that Marcus Whitlock has been in contact with someone from Ashfall Pack, he said, his expression grave. Someone willing to testify against the legitimacy of your bond, offering supposed evidence of your inadequacy prior to your arrival within Cade's territory. Felix Ashworth, Elena said immediately, recognizing the likely source of such testimony without needing further explanation. I suspect so, Owen confirmed. Marcus has apparently offered him some manner of political advancement within Redmoor territory in exchange for testimony designed to undermine your standing before the council. Cade's expression darkened considerably at this revelation. This complicates matters further, he said. Direct testimony from someone within your own former pack carries considerably more weight than mere political speculation from outside parties. Elena felt a fresh wave of anxiety at this news, though beneath the fear, something steadier remained, strengthened by the resolve she had drawn from her grandmother's journal. Then I will simply need to counter whatever testimony Felix offers with the truth of my own experience, she said. I have spent my entire life being underestimated by people determined to see me as inadequate. I do not intend to allow one more such person to define how the Territorial Council perceives me." Cade studied her carefully, clear pride evident in his expression despite the troubling news Owen had delivered. "That is precisely the resolve you will need," he said. "Whatever Felix intends to testify, I have no doubt you possess the strength to counter it effectively." As the final days before the audience continued passing, Elena found herself returning repeatedly to her grandmother's journal, drawing strength from Freya's hard-won wisdom as she prepared to face the most significant challenge of her new life. Whatever Marcus Whitlock and Felix Ashworth intended to bring before the Territorial Council, she understood now, with unshakable clarity, that her worth had never depended on their approval, and it certainly would not begin depending on it now. The Territorial Council convened within a grand stone chamber unlike anything Elena had witnessed before. A circular room lined with tiered seating occupied by pack leaders representing every significant territory across the Western lands. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating the polished floor where Elena now stood beside Cade, facing the assembled council with a steadiness she had spent 2 weeks carefully cultivating. Marcus Whitlock stood across the chamber, a tall, severe man, whose expression carried the confident arrogance of someone accustomed to achieving his desired outcomes through careful political maneuvering. Beside him, to Elena's mounting dread, stood Felix Ashworth, dressed in unfamiliar finery that suggested Marcus had already begun rewarding his cooperation. The council recognizes this audience has been convened to address concerns regarding the legitimacy of the mating bond between Alpha King Cade Thornwood and Elena Voss, announced an elderly wolf seated at the chamber's central podium, whom Elena recognized as the council's presiding elder. "Marcus Whitlock, you may present your concerns." Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying easily throughout the chamber. "Esteemed council members, I do not raise this challenge lightly. The stability of alliances across our Western territory depends significantly upon confidence in the legitimacy of leadership bonds. When such a bond appears suddenly, involving a wolf whose own shift remained incomplete for years, questions naturally arise regarding whether genuine mating recognition occurred or whether other factors influenced this unprecedented union." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members, some nodding thoughtfully, others exchanging skeptical glances. Elena remained still beside Cade, her expression composed despite the familiar anxiety twisting in her stomach. "I have brought testimony," Marcus continued, "from someone with direct knowledge of Elena Voss's history within Ashfall Pack. Testimony that raises legitimate concerns regarding her preparedness and suitability for the significant responsibilities accompanying this bond." He gestured toward Felix, who stepped forward with practiced composure, though Elena noticed a slight tremor betraying his nervousness beneath the confident facade. "Speak plainly," the presiding elder instructed. "What testimony do you offer this council?" "For years," Felix began, "Elena Voss occupied the lowest rank within Ashfall Pack, unable to complete even her most basic shift. She served menial duties within the pack house, largely overlooked by pack leadership, considered by most members to possess little value or potential. Her sudden elevation to Alpha Queen occurred with no apparent preparation, no demonstrated leadership capability, nothing beyond an unexpected and frankly astonishing claim of mating recognition." Elena felt the weight of dozens of skeptical eyes upon her, memories of years spent enduring exactly this kind of dismissive judgment threatening to resurface with uncomfortable familiarity. She forced herself to remain steady, drawing on the resolve she had cultivated throughout weeks of preparation. "Is this testimony disputed?" the presiding elder asked, turning toward Elena and Cade. "May I address the council directly?" Elena asked, her voice carrying more strength than she had anticipated. The elder nodded, gesturing for her to proceed. Elena stepped forward, aware of every eye in the chamber tracking her movement, and took a steadying breath before speaking. "Everything Felix Ashworth has described is accurate," she began, surprising several council members who had clearly expected denial rather than acknowledgement. "I did occupy the lowest rank within Ashfall Pack. My shift did remain incomplete for years. I was, by every measure this pack applied, considered without value." She paused, allowing the weight of her admission to settle before continuing. "But I would ask this council to consider why my shift remained incomplete, rather than simply accepting incompleteness as evidence of permanent inadequacy. I was raised within an environment that offered constant criticism, isolation, and dismissal from the moment my first attempted shift failed. My own family treated my incompleteness as a source of shame rather than a circumstance requiring understanding and support." Several council members shifted in their seats, clearly reconsidering the narrative Felix had presented moments earlier. Elena continued, drawing strength from the memory of her grandmother's journal. Since arriving within Cade's territory, she said, surrounded by genuine acceptance rather than constant judgment, my wolf finally emerged, fully and completely. This did not occur through some external manipulation or trick, as Marcus Whitlock's challenge implies. It occurred because I was finally given the environment necessary for my wolf to feel safe enough to reveal itself. This is easily claimed, Marcus interjected, but difficult to verify. How does this council know your wolf's emergence represents genuine strength, rather than some temporary manifestation encouraged by your desire to secure this significant political position? Elena felt anger flare briefly at the implication, though she maintained her composure, recognizing the importance of responding with dignity, rather than the defensive hostility Marcus likely hoped to provoke. I would welcome demonstration, she said calmly, if the council requires physical evidence beyond testimony alone. The presiding elder's eyebrows rose slightly at this offer. You propose demonstrating your shift directly before this council? I do, Elena confirmed. I understand skepticism naturally accompanies unprecedented circumstances. I would rather address that skepticism directly than allow doubt to fester unchallenged. Cade stepped forward beside her, his expression carrying quiet pride despite the tension gripping the chamber. I support Elena's proposal fully, he said. I believe direct demonstration will resolve any lingering doubt more effectively than continued debate. The presiding elder conferred briefly with several senior council members before addressing the chamber. This council accepts the proposed demonstration. Elena Voss, you may proceed. Elena moved toward the open center of the chamber, aware of the weighted silence settling over the assembled pack leaders. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing on the same sense of safety and acceptance that had allowed her wolf to emerge weeks earlier within the secluded clearing near Cade's territory. Rather than forcing the transformation through desperate effort, she allowed herself simply to trust the process, to trust that her wolf remained fully capable of emerging whenever genuinely called upon. The shift occurred smoothly, considerably faster than her first transformation weeks earlier, her silver-gray wolf form manifesting before the stunned assembly with fluid, unmistakable ease. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber, several council members rising slightly from their seats to observe more closely, clearly impressed by the strength and control evident in her transformation. Elena remained in her wolf form for several long moments, allowing the assembled council ample opportunity to witness the undeniable reality of her fully realized wolf, before shifting back to her human form with equal fluidity and control. This does not resemble the description offered of a wolf incapable of completing even a basic shift, the presiding elder observed, addressing Marcus and Felix directly. Marcus's composed expression faltered slightly, clearly recognizing the demonstration had significantly undermined his challenge. Perhaps circumstances genuinely changed, he conceded reluctantly, though this does not fully address concerns regarding preparedness for the substantial responsibilities accompanying her new position. Preparedness develops through experience and support, Cade interjected firmly, not through arbitrary judgments based on circumstances entirely outside Elena's control. I would remind this council that my own wolf recognized this bond as legitimate the moment we met, well before Elena's shift emerged. The mating pull itself does not require external validation to be considered genuine. The presiding elder nodded slowly, clearly weighing the totality of evidence presented before the council. This council has heard sufficient testimony and demonstration to render judgment, he announced. The bond between Alpha King Cade Thornwood and Elena Voss is recognized as fully legitimate, without further question or challenge from any territory represented within this assembly. Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the chamber, several council members offering approving nods toward Elena, whose composed strength throughout the demonstration had clearly shifted considerable opinion in her favor. Marcus Whitlock's expression remained tight with barely concealed frustration, though he offered no further objection, clearly recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Felix Ashworth, meanwhile, appeared visibly uncomfortable, likely realizing the political advancement Marcus had promised now seemed considerably less secure given the council's decisive ruling. He retreated quietly toward the chamber's exit without further comment, avoiding eye contact with Elena as he departed. As the council session concluded and pack leaders began dispersing from the chamber, several approached Elena directly, offering genuine congratulations and expressions of respect, considerably warmer than the skeptical scrutiny that had greeted her arrival only hours earlier. You handled that with remarkable composure, Cade said once they finally found a quiet moment alone, his expression carrying deep pride and evident relief. I confess I worried how you might respond to such direct challenges to your character. I have faced worse, Elena said simply, though a small, satisfied smile tugged at her lips. And this time, I did not have to face it alone. Owen approached them shortly after, his expression carrying quiet satisfaction. That was masterfully handled, he said. I suspect Marcus Whitlock will think considerably more carefully before attempting any similar challenge in the future. As they prepared to depart the council chamber and begin their journey back toward Cade's territory, Elena felt a profound sense of closure settling over her, the culmination of weeks spent preparing to face doubts that had followed her for her entire life. Whatever remained of Felix Ashworth's resentment, whatever political maneuvering Marcus Whitlock might attempt in the future, Elena understood with unshakable certainty that her legitimacy, her worth, and her strength had been proven not merely to a skeptical council, but to herself. The journey back toward Cade's territory carried a markedly different atmosphere from their travel weeks earlier, the carriage filled with quiet contentment rather than nervous uncertainty. Elena watched the passing landscape with newfound appreciation, recognizing how far she had traveled, both physically and emotionally, since first leaving Ashfall Pack. I want to send word to Nora, Elena said as the carriage rolled steadily along the forest road. She deserves to know how the council session concluded, given everything she offered in support before I departed. A wise idea, Cade agreed. I imagine she has been anxiously awaiting news. They stopped briefly at a waypoint inn along the road, and Elena composed a careful letter describing the council's decisive ruling, along with heartfelt gratitude for her grandmother's journal, which had provided invaluable strength throughout the ordeal. She entrusted the letter to a traveling messenger before continuing their journey, satisfied that Nora would soon share in the relief and vindication Elena herself now carried. As evening approached and the carriage continued its steady progress, Elena found her thoughts drifting toward Felix Ashworth, wondering what consequences he might face for his role in Marcus Whitlock's failed challenge. Do you think Felix will face repercussions at Ashfall for his testimony? She asked. Undoubtedly, Cade said. Word of the council's ruling will spread quickly, and few pack leaders look favorably upon members who align themselves with failed political maneuvering against a legitimately recognized bond. I suspect Felix will find his own ambitions considerably diminished going forward, regardless of whatever advancement Marcus had promised him. Elena considered this, surprised to find herself feeling something closer to pity than satisfaction at the prospect of Felix's diminished standing. I do not particularly wish him harm, she said, though I confess his willingness to testify against me stung more than I initially expected, even knowing his motivations. That reaction speaks to your character, Cade said gently. Despite everything Felix attempted, you still retain enough compassion to consider his circumstances rather than simply celebrating his downfall. Perhaps, Elena said, or perhaps, I simply understand what it feels like to be dismissed and underestimated, even when the person doing the dismissing deserves little sympathy in return. They continued their journey in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day's events gradually settling into something resembling peaceful satisfaction, rather than lingering anxiety. As darkness fell fully across the forest road, Cade reached across the carriage and took Elena's hand gently in his own. I want you to know, he said quietly, how proud I am of the strength you demonstrated today. Not merely the physical demonstration of your shift, though that certainly proved effective, but the composure and dignity you maintained throughout an experience clearly designed to provoke and humiliate you. Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. Appreciation for a partner who recognized her strength, not merely as convenient political advantage, but as something genuinely admirable in its own right. I could not have faced it without your support, she said honestly. Or Owen's guidance, or Nora's unexpected kindness, or even my grandmother's words offering comfort across so many years. Perhaps, Cade said, though I suspect the core strength required to face that council belonged entirely to you, regardless of whatever support surrounded you throughout the process. They arrived back at Cade's territory late that night, the pack house quiet and dark save for a few lanterns left burning near the entrance, in anticipation of their return. Ivy Marlowe greeted them briefly, her relief evident despite the late hour, before allowing them to retreat toward their private chambers for much-needed rest. As Elena settled into bed that night, exhaustion finally catching up with her after weeks of careful preparation and the intense demands of the council session itself, she found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From the invisible reject scrubbing floors within Ashfall's kitchen, to the recognized and respected Alpha Queen who had just successfully defended her legitimacy before the entire territorial council, the transformation felt almost unbelievable when considered in its entirety. Yet it had happened, undeniably and completely, and Elena understood that whatever challenges still awaited her in the future, she now possessed the strength, the support, and the unshakable confidence necessary to face them directly, rather than retreating into the familiar shadows of invisibility that had defined so much of her previous existence. Months passed following the Territorial Council's decisive ruling, and Elena found herself settling ever more fully into her role as Alpha Queen, her confidence growing steadily alongside the strength of her fully realized wolf. The formal ceremony recognizing her position, delayed until the political dust from Marcus Whitlock's failed challenge had fully settled, finally arrived on a bright autumn morning that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. The packhouse grounds had been transformed for the occasion. Colorful banners stretched between the ancient oak trees lining the ceremonial grounds, long tables arranged for the celebration that would follow the formal proceedings. Pack leaders from across the Western Territory had traveled to attend, including many who had witnessed her demonstration before the Territorial Council months earlier. Elena stood in her private chambers, dressed in a gown of deep silver that Ivy had helped select specifically to complement her wolf's coloring, studying her reflection with a mixture of nervousness and genuine excitement. The woman staring back at her bore little resemblance to the invisible servant who had once scrubbed floors within Ashfall's kitchen, yet Elena recognized within that reflection the same person she had always been, finally allowed to fully exist without the weight of others' cruel judgments. A knock sounded at the door, and Nora entered, having traveled once again from Ashfall to witness her sister's formal recognition. "You look beautiful," Nora said, her eyes glistening with emotion as she took in Elena's appearance. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, embracing her sister warmly. "I would not have missed this for anything," Nora replied. "I know we cannot undo the years I spent treating you poorly, but I hope watching you step fully into this role, recognized and celebrated exactly as you deserve, helps balance some of that history." Elena squeezed her sister's hand gratefully, appreciating how far their relationship had traveled since that difficult conversation in Ashfall's private quarters months earlier. Their mother, Clara, had also made the journey, though her presence carried a more complicated weight, the careful, tentative rebuilding of their relationship still ongoing rather than fully resolved. As the appointed hour approached, Elena made her way toward the ceremonial grounds, where Cade waited near a raised platform overlooking the assembled crowd. His expression, upon seeing her approach, carried an unmistakable warmth that steadied Elena's remaining nervousness considerably. "You look extraordinary," he said quietly as she joined him near the platform. "I feel extraordinary," Elena replied, and she meant it fully, without the hesitation or self-doubt that had once accompanied nearly every significant moment of her life. The ceremony began with the presiding elder from the Territorial Council, the same wolf who had overseen Elena's earlier challenge, now offering formal recognition of her position with considerably warmer regard than the cautious skepticism he had displayed months earlier. "We gather today," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd, "to formally recognize Elena Voss as Alpha Queen of this territory, a position she has earned not merely through the mating bond that first connected her to Alpha King Cade Thornwood, but through demonstrated strength, resilience, and character that few among us could claim to match." Elena felt Cade's hand find hers as the elder continued, his presence steady and reassuring as it had been throughout every significant moment of her transformation over the past several months. "Let this ceremony serve as a reminder to every pack represented within this assembly," the elder continued, "that worth is never determined by rank, by circumstance, or by years spent overlooked and underestimated. True strength often emerges from precisely those wolves who have faced the greatest adversity, provided they are eventually given the environment and support necessary for that strength to fully reveal itself." The crowd's attention shifted toward Elena as the elder gestured for her to step forward, and she moved with steady confidence, no longer the trembling, uncertain woman who had once frozen beneath the weight of unexpected attention within Ashfall's courtyard. "Elena Voss," the elder said, "do you accept the full responsibilities accompanying your position as Alpha Queen of this territory, committing yourself to the protection and prosperity of every wolf within these lands?" "I do," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, steady and unwavering. "And do you, Alpha King Cade Thornwood, formally and publicly reaffirm your bond with Elena Voss, recognizing her as your true and equal partner in leading this territory?" "I do," Cade said, his voice equally firm, the conviction in his words carrying no trace of hesitation, despite the months of challenges they had faced together since first meeting in Ashfall's courtyard. The elder raised his hands, addressing the crowd fully. "Then let it be recognized throughout every territory represented here today, that Elena Voss stands as Alpha Queen, her position beyond further question or challenge, her strength and character proven through every trial she has faced since first joining this territory." A roar of approval swept through the assembled crowd, considerably warmer and more genuine than the cautious acknowledgement that had greeted Cade's initial announcement months earlier at Ashfall. Elena felt tears threatening at the overwhelming warmth of the moment. Years of accumulated shame and isolation finally giving way to genuine celebration and recognition. As the formal ceremony concluded and the celebration began in earnest, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers eager to offer congratulations, from pack members who had grown genuinely fond of her over the past months, to visiting leaders who had witnessed her remarkable demonstration before the Territorial Council. Even Marcus Whitlock, present among the assembled pack leaders, offered a stiff but respectful acknowledgement, apparently recognizing the futility of continued resistance against a position now fully and undeniably secured. Later that evening, as the celebration continued beneath a canopy of stars, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Cade near the edge of the ceremonial grounds, the distant sounds of laughter and music providing a comfortable backdrop to their private conversation. "Do you remember," Cade asked, "the day we first met in that courtyard at Ashfall?" "I remember every detail," Elena said. "I remember believing something must be wrong, that surely someone like you could not possibly recognize someone like me as worthy of such a significant bond." "And now?" Cade asked, watching her carefully. Elena smiled, considering the remarkable distance she had traveled since that uncertain, frightened afternoon. "Now I understand that my wolf recognized exactly what yours did, from that very first moment. I simply needed time, and genuine support, to believe I deserved what my wolf already knew to be true." Cade pulled her closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. "I am endlessly grateful my wolf recognized you that day," he said. "Not merely for the bond itself, but for the opportunity to witness the remarkable strength you have revealed throughout every challenge since." "Thank you," Elena said, "for never once doubting me, even when I struggled to believe in myself." They remained together beneath the stars for a while longer, the celebration continuing around them, before eventually rejoining the festivities to share in the collective joy of a day that represented far more than a simple formal recognition. It represented the culmination of Elena's entire journey, from the invisible reject scrubbing floors within Ashfall's kitchen, to the Alpha Queen now standing proudly beside her mate, fully recognized and respected by every territory across the Western lands. As the celebration finally began winding down late into the night, Elena found her mother approaching, her expression carrying a rare, genuine warmth that Elena had seen only occasionally since their difficult reconciliation months earlier. "I am proud of you," Clara said simply, the words carrying more weight, given how rarely her mother had offered such direct affirmation throughout Elena's life. "I know I failed you in many ways over the years, but watching you today, I could not be more genuinely proud of the woman you have become." Elena embraced her mother, allowing herself to accept the imperfect but genuine reconciliation being offered, understanding that healing old wounds rarely occurred through single perfect moments, but rather through consistent, gradual efforts toward something better than what had existed before. As the last guests finally began departing and the ceremonial grounds grew quiet once more, Elena stood beside Cade, watching the stars overhead, reflecting on the extraordinary transformation of her entire existence within the span of less than a single year. The wolf everyone had once called worthless now stood recognized and celebrated as Alpha Queen, her strength undeniable, her worth finally understood not merely by those around her, but by herself. Whatever challenges the future might bring, Elena understood with complete and unshakable certainty that she would face them exactly as she had faced everything since that fateful day in Ashfall's courtyard, with strength she had always possessed, finally free to reveal itself fully, and with a partner beside her who had recognized her worth from the very first moment their eyes met. The reject had become the queen, not through mere chance or fortunate circumstance, but through the unwavering resilience that had always existed within her, patiently waiting for the world to finally recognize what her own wolf had known all along. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, Elena settled into her responsibilities with a steadiness that surprised even herself. She began overseeing matters of trade and welfare within the territory, working closely with Ivy and several other advisors to ensure that no wolf within Cade's lands ever experienced the kind of isolation and dismissal she herself had endured for so many years. She established a small program, modest at first, designed to support young wolves experiencing delayed shifts, offering them guidance and reassurance rather than the shame and criticism that had defined her own early experiences. Priya arrived one afternoon, having finally accepted Elena's repeated invitations to visit the territory and consider a permanent position within the packhouse kitchens, this time as head cook in her own right rather than remaining subject to the rigid hierarchies of Ashfall. This place feels different, Priya observed, taking in the warm, orderly kitchen where staff moved with confidence rather than anxious caution. I can see why you feel so at home here. I hope you will feel the same. In time, Elena said, embracing her old friend warmly. You believed in me when almost no one else did. I would be honored to have you here permanently. Priya accepted the offer, and within a month, she had settled comfortably into her new role, her steady presence a welcome reminder of Elena's past, integrated thoughtfully into the promising future now unfolding before her. Nora, too, began visiting more frequently, gradually rebuilding the sisterly bond that had been so badly damaged during their years at Ashfall. During one such visit, as the two sisters walked together through the Packhouse Gardens, Nora shared news that she had begun considering a more permanent move to the territory herself, having grown weary of the rigid hierarchies and lingering prejudices that continued defining much of Ashfall's culture despite the Pack's public reckoning months earlier. I think I would like to start fresh somewhere, Nora admitted. Somewhere not so heavily defined by old assumptions and outdated judgments. You would be welcome here, Elena said sincerely. Whatever mistakes existed between us, I have no interest in continuing to hold them against you, particularly now that you have shown genuine effort toward change. As autumn deepened into winter, Elena found herself increasingly comfortable within her role, no longer merely surviving the unexpected transformation of her circumstances, but genuinely thriving within them. She and Cade continued strengthening not only their bond, but their partnership in leading the territory, each bringing complementary strengths to the responsibilities they now shared. One quiet evening, as snow began falling gently outside their private chambers, Elena found herself once again reading through her grandmother's journal, having returned to its pages periodically throughout the months since Nora had first gifted it to her. She turned to a final entry near the back of the worn book, one she had somehow overlooked during her earlier readings. Whatever wolf someday reads these words, know that the path toward recognizing your own worth is rarely simple or immediate. It requires patience, genuine support, and above all, a willingness to release the false beliefs others have placed upon you throughout years of misunderstanding. I hope you find, as I eventually did, a place and a person capable of seeing the strength you always possessed, even during the years when you struggled to see it yourself. Elena closed the journal gently, setting it aside as Cade entered the room. Drawn by the quiet stillness of the evening, he settled beside her near the window, watching the snow continue its steady descent across the moonlit grounds below. You seem thoughtful tonight, he observed. I am simply grateful, Elena said, resting her head against his shoulder, for everything that led me here, even the difficult parts. I do not think I would fully appreciate this life if I had not first endured everything that came before it. Cade wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer as they watched the snow together in comfortable silence. I am grateful as well, he said quietly, that my wolf recognized something worth waiting 12 years for, even if neither of us understood the full significance of that recognition until the moment we finally met. As winter settled fully over the territory, Elena continued growing into her role as Alpha Queen, no longer haunted by the shadows of her past, but rather strengthened by them, understanding fully now that every hardship she had endured had ultimately prepared her for the strength and resilience now defining her present and future. The wolf once dismissed as worthless had become not merely accepted, but genuinely celebrated, standing as living proof that true worth could never be diminished by circumstance, however cruel or prolonged that circumstance might initially appear. And as she looked toward the future stretching ahead, filled with promise rather than the isolation and doubt that had once defined her entire existence, Elena understood with complete certainty that she had finally, truly, come home.